teeth on the back of an old church pew. I learned to walk in the ways of light and truth, and I was told not to speak till I was spoken to. I heard it preach what I should and I should not do, and the choir sang, tried to be a good boy, but I ain't a boy no more. I've seen some things that a man just can't ignore, and this world's gonna see what I'm standing for. I've kept my peace, but I can't hold my tongue anymore. You can't buy my silence, you can't steal my voice, you can't keep me quiet. I will break the noise. Try to beat me down, tell me to shut my mouth, but there's a time to speak, and the time is now. The squeaky wheel is always getting grease. Well, I've been sitting still, parked here on the side of the street, always tiptoeing, trying not to wake the beast. Oh, but here I come. All you monsters are better run from me. You can't buy my silence, you can't steal my voice, you can't keep me quiet. I will bring the noise. Try to beat me down, tell me to shut my mouth. There's a time to speak, and the time is now. Oh, it's the time is now. Yes, it's now. Oh, the time is now. Yeah. You can't buy my silence, you can't steal my voice, you can't keep me quiet. I will bring the noise. Try to beat me down, tell me to shut my mouth, but there's a time to speak, and the time is now. You can't buy my silence, you can't steal my voice, you can't keep me quiet. I'm gonna break the noise. Try to beat me down, tell me to shut my mouth, but there's a time to speak, and the time is now.
Hi folks, welcome to the Woodstock Truth Squad. My name is Steve Romine, and you're listening to progressive, community, commercial-free, truly independent, and definitely uncensored radio in the Hudson Valley here in the hamlet of Woodstock, New York. And boy, am I glad to be here tonight. And we got a real good show planned for you tonight with quite a extraordinary people that will be talking about a very serious matter around 9/11. And we will have Barbara Honegger call in at 7:30. Also, I believe Dave Mieswinkle will be calling in. Dave Mieswinkle and Barbara Honegger are both on the 9/11 inquiry, 9/11 Lawyers Committee let's see, Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. That's what it is. Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And this is what's so cool about these guys. They're a team of 50 lawyers, and they filed a petition with the U.S. Justice Department in New York, and for to have a grand jury hearing on controlled demolition, the events that they say were done by controlled demolition, and I say too. And believe it or not, in case you haven't heard, the U.S. Attorney announced that they are convening a grand jury and will review the evidence for controlled demolition. That is happening as we speak. Because grand jury is a secret. Nobody knows what's going on when they go on. And we only know that they've been convened. We don't know the details. And so not only that, but earlier this year, Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry filed a lawsuit against the FBI for not sharing the information that they had with congressional leaders. I mean, isn't that awesome? We're moving forward on this issue, folks. This is really an amazing thing that's happening, and yet you haven't heard a word about it in the mainstream media. That's what we love about this little radio station with a big voice, is that we talk about stuff here nobody else dares to talk about, and we're not afraid to talk about it. And this non-profit radio station, commercial free, is a very, very valuable commodity in this town and in the surrounding areas where it reaches, which is Boyceville, which is Red Hook, which is New Paltz, which is parts of Kingston, parts of Saugerties. Am I forgot any, Felicia?
Oh, let's see. The other side of the Ashokan Reservoir.
Right.
And in some ways, if you take that route down to Grahamsville, we don't get to Grahamsville, but we get to the border of Ulster County up on the hills there in that route, amazingly. Well, you said Mount Tremper, I think.
And I didn't say Mount Tremper.
And a little bit beyond.
And so it reaches all these areas and keeps the public informed of very important information. And so I want to put it out there to anybody in the audience who can lend a hand with this radio station financially in any way. We always need financial help to keep this radio station going. And Felicia will give you the details on that right now.
You can write a check or money order payable to Birds of a Feather, the 501c3 New York State not-for-profit public charity. Birds of a Feather, BIRDS, is who you write the check, money order, or MoneyGram to. And you send it to Woodstock 104, Post Office Box 104, Woodstock, New York, 12498. We were working on other ways to contribute, hopefully making it easier for today's people, but there's been some setbacks, so that's not quite yet. And also, if you wish to have a receipt or statement of your, beyond your check or money order stub, then please make a notation either in the memo of the check or money order or in a separate note. And of course, at other times, I've mentioned some of the things that are thank you gifts that you can have if you request them for different donation levels. And some of them for quite modest donations, starting with $2. And, send what you can. And hopefully you're doing well enough to send, enough people. We need more people to support the station. Because if each person that hears the station sends a little bit of money, and if you can send it each month, then the station can continue indefinitely. But otherwise, we may run out of funds.
Now, before I get on with, we have a guest in the studio here tonight with us. It's going to play some live music for us. And his name is Michael Mulvey.
Howdy, folks.
And we want to give him a warm welcome into this studio. He is a man of many talents, and music is one of them. And we'll start off with his music in just a couple of minutes. But the very first thing I want to say is I want to remind everybody that the second Saturday of this month is the meeting, the Truth Sayers Forum meeting at the Woodstock Library at 7 o'clock, where we discuss about smart meters, cell towers, Wi-Fi, 5G, and all of the different involuntary exposures that we're all being exposed to without our consent, without our permission, and without giving us the real lowdown on what this stuff is doing to us, because they've known for years the harm that it causes. And if you want to find out more about that for your own self right at the moment, or after the show, go to thetruthsayerswoodstock.com. thetruthsayerswoodstock.com. All kinds of pages and info and videos on that whole issue. And coming up July 27th on the Green, we will be having a protest as part of a nationwide protest against 5G. Very important, folks. There's no health studies that show this stuff is safe, yet they're pushing it down our throats, forcing it into communities all around the country, and none of us has said it's okay. They are hijacking our environment, and they have no right to. Not for us and not for the children that come in the future. They do not have that right. So the only way that we can, we need people to stand with us and stand up and be counted and say, no, not in my name. So please join us July 27th at noon on the Green. That's a Saturday this time. Last time it was a Wednesday or a Thursday. But this time it's on a Saturday. So we're going to have a big crowd. And so do that. And one other thing I want to say is I did get the documents into the appellate court today on time. Tonight, 5 o'clock was the deadline. I got there at 3 o'clock. So the documents have been delivered to the court. They've been served on the utilities lawyers. So they got it in Poughkeepsie. We drove to Poughkeepsie. Then we drove up to Albany, and we served them in both places. And it's all said and done. Article 78 is in place. The appeal is in place. And so we got a lot of going on here. And on that note, I want to start the show out with our live guest, Michael Mulvey, with his, what do you call it, U-bass? Is it U-bass?
Yes, this is a very, very small bass guitar with a pretty big sound anyway. I bought it for traveling, backpacking kind of thing. Anyway, I've got a parody of a tune by the Grateful Dead here that I think speaks to our times and our political quandary. So here it is. Spreading lies in the news. I'm Uncle Scam. I win, you lose. Give me 5. I'll take a dive. It ain't dumb luck. It's all about the buck. Well, check my pulse. It don't change. But this American heart, it beats dark and strange. We shame our flag, and that's a drag. We gotta rock the boat and get out the vote. Save that flag, save it, try and try. Oh yeah, 'cause your civil rights, they're going gone goodbye. Well, I'm Uncle Scam, and I'm a sham. I've been selling out all my citizens. Shake the hand, well that shook the hand of King Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. So don your marching shoes and pay your union dues, or you will lose your rights to choose. 'Cause I'll drink your health and I'll steal your wealth. I'll ruin your life, causing civil strife. Well, save that flag, save it, try, oh try. Your civil rights, they're going gone, goodbye. Back to back, false flag attacks, stolen elections, and alternate facts. We're all confused from watching corporate news that blames the poor for this empire's blues. Save that flag, save it, try and try. Your civil rights, they're going gone, goodbye. That's right. Your civil rights, they're going gone, bye-bye, bye-bye.
Wow.
Well, no doubt.
Wow. That was awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some explaining to do next time I see Jerry Garcia, I'm sure. Yeah. Anyway, I did want to just that tune was written tongue in cheek to speak to a lot of the issues that we have, but I just wanted to say how important and the patriot, the real American patriot that's been with us all the time, the social progressive, the one that has stood on the line and risked their own liberty, their own lives, their own their own happiness and comfort, to stand with others who are being oppressed within the system and force the U.S. to honor the contracts it's made with its people and with humanity. So on behalf of all of those that appreciate the work, I like to thank everybody that works out there for social justice.
Well said, Mike. Well said. And boy, what a contribution you just made to the station tonight. That song was awesome. I happen to be a deadhead and a social activist. So
Yes.
It's like perfect. And can we play that regularly on the show? Because we have a recording. We have a recording now.
Yeah, you can, and actually, I played it with Journey, my friend Journey Blue
Yeah,
Heaven,
we love Journey.
and her band, they actually backed me on it, and I got a lousy recording of it, but I want to go back and revisit it because I think coming into this election cycle and with what's going on, I think, like as Wavy Gravy would say that, like the important messages of our time, they go down a lot easier if we can wrap them in something that shows us how foolish our views of life and our culture can be. So if I'm laughing at myself, it's a lot harder for someone to argue with me, since I'm already admitting that I'm kind of an idiot anyway.
Right.
But I'm a happy idiot, and I mean well.
You're not an idiot in my book. You're very intelligent. That was quite.
Don't let that get out.
That was quite the song. What a rewrite. I mean, that was beautiful. Jerry would love that song.
It actually came to me. I was walking through town last July 4th, and the words just kind of flowed out as I was walking around thinking about where we were then. And I changed a couple words here and there, but now here we are, and things are so much more dire now. We're watching not only our own civil liberties slip away, but we're watching the absolute degradation of our humanity. I mean, I've always understood that there was corruption in the system, but I can almost understand the motives for the greed and the power, and not forgive it, but see what that's about. But when you have an administration or people who are actually insulting our humanity,
yes,
it's bad enough you're robbing us
exactly.
of our wealth and the wealth that we've robbed from other people, and preventing the world from benefiting from that wealth to be used for the social betterment. But now you're inciting us against each other by insulting our dignity as human beings. And that's absolutely just unacceptable as far as I'm concerned.
Can I ask you, do you have a litany of songs for the future that you can come here and play, or you can share with us? We'd love to have that.
Yes, I actually do. I've been working with a bunch of really great local musicians. I've been working on a record about social justice issues, and I've
That's
got
right up our alley.
They're short tunes. One's about the American Green movement, Green New Deal. One's about the Earth First movement. One's about water issues. I have one that's a civil rights tune.
Nice.
It's a marching tune, a tune that would be sung with people marching arm in arm. I have a couple of Latin tunes I need some help with the right Spanish-speaking poets that can help. The tunes that I have they're meant to speak to the indigenous people in Central America, their plight, and the plight of the people in Puerto Rico.
Right.
I have the sentiment, and I can't write the tunes because I know from my position of my privilege, in this culture, growing up as a white male. And I had a union job, all my life, that I can't speak to other people's issues, but I do want to understand them better, so I can help decolonize my own mind. So
wonderful.
So I'm looking for those
good focus,
those
man.
Latin
Good
poets. Step up.
Good focus. I love the focus. A very good, concise. Attitude toward the whole situation. I love it. And we have people on? So we have people who have called in now. We're going to switch gears a little, and we're going to reveal to you folks that in the past we had on this show an individual who we called Mark Anonymous. And Mark Anonymous is none other than our very own Michael Mulvey in Woodstock.
Yes.
And Michael is basically a whistleblower. And I will call you a whistleblower, and a brave whistleblower. And on that note, I would like to introduce another whistleblower, and that's Barbara Honegger from Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Hold on, we got a technical sound here. Let's see, we still have Barbara on the line?
Hello? Oh, okay, there was some sort of strange feedback.
So we have Barbara on the line, and Barbara, I just got back from serving documents up in Albany, or having them served in Albany in a lawsuit I'm involved in. I'm pro se litigant, and so I didn't have time to get the bio together. Welcome to the show, and could you please give the audience your bio, because I just got to the studio just a little bit ago from Albany.
Sure, no problem. Okay. I don't know if you have a website where you could post it that goes with the show. If so, please do. But probably for today's show, the most important information that people need to know, because we're going to be talking about 9/11 truth and the terrible cover-up of what really happened on 9/11 in New York City and the Pentagon and Shanksville and how it proves that the official story of who attacked our country on 9/11 is completely false. So that the real perpetrators are very dangerous and they're still at large. That's the bottom line. So for that part of today's program, and I don't know if there will be others later.
Hopefully there will.
Okay, well, we're going to be on for 2.5 hours, so we'll see. But for that part of the program, for the 9/11 Truth part of the program, what matters, I think, is that for almost 2 decades, for 16 and a half years, I was the senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School here in Monterey, California, where I live, in the Monterey Peninsula on California's central coast. And the Naval Postgraduate School, where I was the senior military affairs journalist all those years, including 5 years before 9/11, on 9/11, and 11 years after. The Naval Postgraduate School, which is also known as NPS, and is in Nantucket,
Okay.
PS, is the Department of Defense's premier science, technology, and national security affairs graduate research university. So you should know that about me. And you should also know that for a number of years now I have been on the board of directors as well as on the grand jury petition research and drafting committees of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And I'm hoping that our president and executive director, David Mieswinkle, who is an attorney, will also be on this call if he isn't already. So I am on the board with Dave, and it's possible also that our litigation director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, Mick Harrison, will also be on this call if he isn't already. So those are the two major aspects of my background, in addition to the fact that I was a White House policy analyst during the Reagan-Bush Senior administration in the West Wing, and also an official in the Department of Justice.
And you became a whistleblower, am I correct?
Oh, I'm quite a whistleblower, yes. Both on 9/11 from the inside of the Department of Defense, but also I'm the author of the book October Surprise, which is the first book on the subject that revealed the true story, the deep story behind the Iran side of Iran-Contra, the treasonous arms for hostage delay deal between the 1980 Reagan-Bush Senior campaign and the Khomeini regime in Iran that was then holding our 52 hostages.
Well, I know I certainly am honored to have you on our radio station tonight for the second time, and I'm still honored, and thank you for calling in and being part of this.
Absolutely.
And I want to introduce you, and who else do we have on the phone? Do we have Dave on the phone?
We have Mr. Mieswinkle.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, how you doing?
This is Dave Mieswinkle, who is one of the lawyers on 9/11 inquiry, on Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Dave?
Sure, I can. I'm a retired police officer. I did 23 years, and I actually was a whistleblowing police officer. And at one time, I had to fight to keep my job, and I was able to do that and actually organize and bring the federal authorities into my town and have some powerful people arrested, indicted, sent to jail. But I did that as a police officer for quite a while, and I've been an attorney, mostly doing criminal defense since that time. I am presently the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee, and that's just a little bit about my background, Steve. I have, on behalf of 9/11 Truth, myself and Pamela Sensei, a dear friend, we hiked 440 miles, the crime scenes with backpacks and camping gear and filming, and we're actually doing a movie which half done where we talk to people on the from Shanksville. We walked the backwoods of Pennsylvania down to the western Maryland and West Virginia to the Pentagon, and then and filming all the way. And then we changed gear and we walked from Washington D.C. now, instead of the backwoods, the highways, which are a little treacherous, up through Baltimore, Wilmington, Philadelphia, through New Jersey, up to the George Washington Bridge and across the bridge, and then 10 miles down into Manhattan and Ground Zero. So
Wow.
I've always supported architects and engineers, and friends with Richard Gage, as well as Barbara is also very dear with Richard, and I appreciate their work. Their work has allowed the attorneys to put it to really easier and more easily organize the evidence that they have over the years accumulated and put it into a legal format so that we could present it to a grand jury like it was done in New York City, and which we hope to do other grand juries and other crime scene areas in the future.
Wow, that's a mouthful, Dave. That's a mouthful. Thank you for coming on the show. And do we have Mick Harrison on the show? Mick, are you there?
Yes, this is Mick.
Welcome to the Woodstock Truth Squad, Mick. This is your first time. These other guys have been on the show twice now, and I want to personally welcome you also.
Well, thank you very much. Good to be here.
And what's your background? What can you describe yourself to us?
Sure. Short version is I'm a public interest lawyer. I've been in practice for 27 years. I do mostly whistleblower protection, environmental enforcement for citizens, and government oversight types of work. I've been involved with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry for about 3 years. Started out as a volunteer. I'm now the half-time litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry. And I've been involved actively investigating 9/11 issues for quite a bit longer than that. Worked with the Bloomington, Indiana 9/11 working group for a number of years as a volunteer, like we all were, before I became involved with the Lawyers Committee, and am now directing the Lawyers Committee's litigation program, which includes the petition to the grand jury in New York, federal petition, the FBI lawsuit, which we may talk about, and several Freedom of Information case lawsuits, among others. I'll leave it there for the moment.
That's quite a story there in itself, especially this new lawsuit that I only recently heard about. That's a great step forward. Thank you for doing that, all of you guys. And I thank Barbara, but I want to say to each and every one of you, I'm honored to have you on my show. You're doing great work, and you ought to be commended, and I'm commending you right now.
Thank you very much.
And
Thank you.
I want to introduce you to our guest in the studio, who you've all been waiting to meet for a while, Mr. Michael Mulvey, who was who was an operating engineer at the World Trade Center, in the Union in New York City, and involved with a lot of people that were involved in the 9/11 tragedy, as being people that were on the scene. And I'm going to let him speak, and I want to let him tell his story so you can hear it firsthand. And so I'm going to let him speak right now. Here we go with Michael.
So I just want to give hi.
Thank you for doing this.
Well, you're quite welcome, Barbara. I have to say, honestly, I'm pretty inspired just to be on a program with you. That was, in fact, the first election that I did vote in, and I was really quite upset when Reagan took office. So, thanks for fighting for my vote back then, and for continuing the work, and to all of us who do. So I just wanted to say, I was an operating engineer by trade. My family goes back 4 generations. My father's grandfather came off the boat he went from Ireland to Wales to work in the coal mine, and then he came to Boston and he joined the Knights of Labor, and he organized on his way down to New York City, and he and 7 other men founded the International Union of Operating Engineers in 1896. And and so basically, all of America's infrastructure is built and operated by operating engineers. Those cranes you see on the towers that are erecting themselves, those are operating engineers. They're the A part of the trade. And then the people that operate the plants, once the physical infrastructures are put in, they're the operating engineers that operate. And that's the end of the trade that I was in. My father, Jim Mulvey, was the vice president. He started as an organizer for the operating engineers in the late 50s, but he organized the World Trade Center actually for the operating engineers, as well as the Javits Center and many other places, and he wrote contracts for a living. So there were a couple different unions that had engineers in the World Trade Center. And so just to understand a little bit more context, all of this infrastructure, the refrigeration equipment, the fire protection equipment, the water, the air handlers, all of these things are operated by licensed engineers, licensed through the City of New York's fire department. Very strenuous written and practical examinations. You have to work for years in the trade to even sit for the, to operate these plants. And we have full control of the infrastructure of the particular union I was working for. The local I was working for at the time of 9/11 is Local 94, and they have all of the office space in New York City. So basically, every one of those big office towers has a crew of operating engineers in it who operate and maintain the licensed equipment so that the lights can stay on. And when the fire department shows up at a building, it's always us that have to meet them. On 9/11, my local lost 3 really good men, including the chief engineer, Vincent DeLeo, of the World Trade Center, who had already left the building. And after being given the all clear, he actually went back in to help assist other people, and then he lost his life. So basically, anytime any piece of equipment or any part of the mechanical areas which we are legally responsible for are entered or are worked on by a vendor or a contractor, we actually supervise them. And we allow them into the space. We have control of the entire space. Any place in that building that's protected by the fire protection equipment, the engineer has the master key to and can get in there at any time. So with that as background, there was really, really disturbing bit of information that came out about, it came to me about 5 weeks after 9/11. I actually at the time was working, I was the shop steward at the CUNY Graduate Center, 365 Fifth Avenue. I was working the midnight to 8 a.m. in the morning shift, and that building is just diagonally across from the Empire State Building, this northeast corner. And I had just left work and was driving to Woodstock, as a matter of fact, and I crossed the Tappan Zee Bridge. I looked south, the George Washington Bridge. I looked south, and there's World Trade Center. I got on the Garden State Parkway, and on NPR, like within 5 minutes, I heard that the first plane headed the tower. And so, like everybody else, I was shocked. But as the events, it just didn't smell right from the beginning, and I don't want to get sidetracked. But about a month and a half later, there was a story going around that men that had worked in the World Trade Center as the operating engineers had been ordered to allow access to mechanical areas to people that were not to be put in the official logs. So this is a really strange anomaly, because as an operating engineer, when you sign on to your shift, you have a logbook and the pages are numbered and it's a legal document. Security has a logbook that has numbered pages. It's a legal document. They're the record and for the custody of the building. So nobody comes into a space and doesn't have security, or the engineers, if the people are going into a mechanical area, note this. About 3 months before the events of 9/11, 2001, the building was undergoing transition, ownership, things were changing, and there was to be work done on all of the telecom closets in the towers. And the telecom closets are actually adjacent to the elevator shafts, which, as you probably know, the main structural supports for the towers were around the central core elevator assembly. So I heard a story, and then I had met one of the men who worked at the World Trade Center at the time, and he was a mechanic, and he worked the midnight to 8 shift on Saturday night to Sunday morning, which is the deadest time in the building. Really, there's almost nobody in the building except for the operating engineers and security. So this 3-month period on Saturday nights leading up to 9/11, there were a crew. The man describes that there was a crew mechanical crew, like you'd have just vendors who come in to like work on, the infrastructure, but they would all be licensed and insured. That these crews were picked up by this man, and then escorted every Saturday night to various telecom closets, and there was a crew of them, and they didn't have any insignias on their jumpsuits. They had all the tools. They showed up in vans that were unmarked, and our men were told to escort them to the mechanical areas, the telecom closets, and unlock them as needed, but do not go in there and supervise, do not check up on their work afterwards, and most of all, do not enter their that you gave these people access. And security was given the same instructions. Do not put in your legal record that there were vendors or contractors in the building. You couldn't identify who they were anyway. So this went on for, these 12 or so Saturday nights. And after the towers came down, we had lost some men, and some of the guys on the job were like, sometimes stuff happens when a building changes hands. Like there's one legal owner and there's another. In this case, the Port Authority had been the owner, and now it's going into a private hands, and there are certain anomalies. But when management asks for a favor during a transition time, a lot of times they're just accommodated. So this is a really strange request, and it didn't seem right, and it became a union problem to a very, not to a major degree, but it brought attention, because if the man who is on shift as the operating engineer, if anything transpires to any of the equipment that he's licensed to control in that building, he's legally responsible, and his employers are legally responsible for anything that happens. So just the fact that these people who, if they work for Comcast, or if they were just communications people, they would have had the badges for their company. They would have been listed as a legal vendor that was on a bill of sale somewhere as servicing that building, and they would have been written into the logs. So the anomaly of having people access those critical areas in the dead of night on Saturday night to Sunday morning when there's nobody there, and have management instruct not to keep any legal record of it anywhere, raised a really big flag. And by the time our Christmas meeting, our union meeting, which is like the first week in December, these events were very fresh. It was only 2 months, and we were still, we were having memorials every weekend for people that had died, our engineers and firemen, and others. It was a really difficult time, but so when I had sat down, this story had been going around, and when I actually got to sit down at a table and have this man tell me the story, it just blew my mind. Like there was absolutely no reason why there wouldn't be a record of anybody coming into a mechanical space. And when you think about the fact that the mechanical spaces were adjacent to the structural supports of the trade center, it does suggest that there was at least opportunity for, perhaps a charge to be planted or whatever. I'm not saying it was. I don't have. And again, I need to once again point out that this is secondhand information, because I was told by the man who actually allowed these people into the spaces. So I wasn't there myself, but the man who did this told it directly to me, and I certainly believed him. I know that this information went up the chain. It went through our union. It went through various other people. It went to various law enforcement agencies. I don't know particularly who the FBI would have interviewed, but I can't imagine that the operators and who are effectively first responders and the ones who control the physical building would not have been spoken to just as a matter of course in an investigation. That's just an assumption. But that men came forward and made sure that this information was put out there, and then to just never hear anything. Like the information went out there into various New York City law enforcement, the police department, firemen were told, I believe the FBI was told, our union president knew about it and said that he, and so the information seems to just have gone into a black hole, because I never heard about it after the fact, after.
Can you just tell us because the anomaly you're speaking about, can you just tell us what the exact protocol is? When people come in, they have to register, they have to log in, they have to be identified, who they are, and they have to be escorted to be observed the work that they're doing. And all of that was put on hold during those 12 weeks at midnight shifts. Is that correct?
That is correct. And so just to give people an idea of how this might work is, there are civil servants or engineers, or sometimes they're contractors, that we operate the physical infrastructure, and the fire department entrusts us with the fire protection systems, and we become part of the fire safety team, and we control the building. So when the fire department says we need water here, we need those air handlers shut off, we need that we need access. Can you get us someplace? So for anybody to be admitted to the building, they'd have to have a reason, or they'd have to be in a list of people who are coming in. So any vendor, we call them vendors, contractors that actually come in and do work that like our crew wouldn't do. If they come in to work on any of the equipment, they're usually a list of known vendors. Because they're regularly contracted to come in. If we have a certain large pump that needs to be replaced, or if the various communications equipment are managed by 2 or 3 different companies, and there may be some contractors that do work for individual tenants within the towers, those people would all be vetted. They would be known to be licensed and insured and accredited by the City of New York. They would then be a work order goes out for work to be done, and it goes from whoever asked for the work to be done, would then go through the building management, who then, and then they would then turn around and say, okay, these people, and if it was a new vendor or contractor, there'd be a vetting process that would then be gone through, and then the security detail, and most specifically the engineers, would be told, and it would be in the log specifically, on the Saturday night shift at midnight, a crew of 4 from XYZ Communications is going to arrive at the South Loading Dock, blah, blah, whatever it is, and you're to meet them. Security will know that they're there. These people will be, the license plate will be put on the security's thing. They'll show identification, and then the engineer and or security guard will then stay with the contractors as they grab their tools, and they'll say, okay, here's the list of, which one are you going to work in first? Here's the list that I'm allowed to open for you. And they would say, okay, we're working in the telephone, communications closets on the, 2nd through the 11th floor this Saturday. And we're working on, and this would go on. And then, so there would be an order for the work to be done. Building management would then approve contractors to come in and be on the property to do it. Security and the engineers would be told to meet these people, and this would be then logged. So instead, we have a situation here where people that present no identification, we have no knowledge of their origin, and then we're told not to put it in our legal document, which means that we're responsible for whatever they do while they're there. Wow. And then on top of that, to say that, no, don't go in there and look over their shoulder. Don't go in there and check on. Don't go in there and ask them if they need anything. If they need anything, they'll find you. No, don't go in there afterwards and make sure that they've cleaned up after themselves. So nobody, quite frankly, these people come and they go and they're given access, and it's a mystery as to why this would be allowed. I mean, just from any number of legal standpoints, but just what the heck would your insurance company say? You got these billion-dollar towers here, and you're letting Joe Schmo, who doesn't even show you a certificate that says he's licensed to work in the City of New York, is now inside your, is inside the heart of your structure in sensitive areas. So that's pretty much how this would normally happen, and it just was all bypassed in this situation, according to the crew.
I want to allow each one of the lawyers committee to talk with Michael and ask him any questions that come to your mind. Starting with you first, Barbara.
Well, I will say I'm not an attorney, though I was a Justice Department official, but thank you. And I just want to, again, thank you so much, Michael. Isn't that correct? Your name is Mike?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. For being willing to come forward. I have a couple of burning questions. The first one, obviously, is, as you know, we are the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and on the phone you have the President and Executive Director as well as the Litigation Director. And what we need in order to both identify and bring the real perpetrators to justice who have done this is for you and hopefully the gentleman that you referred to who told you this, a more direct source, to meet with our attorneys and to provide what's called a sworn juror affidavit. Now, what's important about that, I know that you have mentioned to Steve, or at least he mentioned to me before the program, that you are open, and thank goodness that you are personally open to doing everything you can to identify and bring the real perpetrators to justice, which is what we are about. And what is needed are these sworn juror affidavits, as detailed as possible. So my first question is, would you be willing to do one and meet with the attorneys? I know Dave Mieswinkle is in New Jersey and would be easily able to meet with you. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mick, he can speak for himself, of course, would be willing to drive all the way from where he is to be there as well. So first question, would you be willing to do a sworn juror affidavit? And just so you know, at any time we are able to amend our grand jury petition on the World Trade Center attacks with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And if there is the possibility of your colleague, who was a more direct source to you for this information, if for any reason he knows someone or himself talked to the FBI, then we would be able to take his sworn juror affidavit, and we would want to do that in any case if he were willing. And if there is information that the FBI was told from a credible source, him or other, that he could put us in touch with, then we could also amend our lawsuit against the FBI and the U.S. Attorney General, William Barr, that we filed on March 25th in federal court in Washington, D.C., and we are able to amend that suit as well to add those sworn juror affidavits if we feel that that's appropriate and strong evidence, which obviously this is, critical evidence. So I guess that's my major two questions. Would you be willing to meet with our attorneys and do a sworn juror affidavit, and would you be willing to contact your more direct source to see if he would be willing to do that as well?
As far as it goes for me, I don't have firsthand knowledge. It's hearsay from the source that actually was involved, and so I'm willing to testify to everything that I've said here. And as far as the men that worked there and that actually allowed these contractors in, access to them would have to come through the union, and I can put you in touch with the union. And if this like I said, your attorneys, if there is any stonewalling or any lack of cooperation, it's easy enough to discern who were the engineers and mechanics who worked on the midnight shifts for those periods prior to them, and they can be called and asked specifically, even if none of them volunteered to come forward. That would be, I don't know if my testimony, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't, if my story, my testimony here, is enough to convince, a judge or whoever to say, we want to find who these parties were who supposedly let these contractors in, and so therefore we insist that you tell us, who worked those shifts and so that
right.
would pretty much because I can't another union brother, I can't give you his name. I can, all I can do is tell you that the the people are there and they work. I imagine this gentleman was younger than me, and he probably isn't retired yet. He may very well still be working in Lower Manhattan somewhere as an operating engineer. for
Did
local
I hear
information.
you correctly? It's a little bit difficult connection. Did I hear you say that that this gentleman, as well as others from the Union 94, have, I think you said, been called already to so testify? And if so, to whom? Do you know?
I said what I said, and I will clarify, is that the information that there were these anomalies was told to various parties by various parties, and I have no, including federal investigators and local New York City Police Department, but I have no knowledge of whether any of those parties were ever contacted by the authorities. I just know that the authorities were told that there are people who have information of value to your investigation, and this is what they're, and so you would assume, I mean, I would assume that if I were the FBI, and I'm not a law enforcement official, that one of the first things I would do. Right.
Yes,
so, and it was kind of odd because right after this happened, there was a little kind of a funny thing that changed in the union. We actually, our local became he was a new president of local. We started getting overtures from various agencies that we would help be part of the front line in the homeland security, keeping your eyes and ears open, because obviously the engineer who operates a nuclear power plant would be someone you'd want to know that you could trust, or that So it kind of got weird after this, because then there was this thing where men who are, or people who are representing workers in collective bargaining are now being looked to be in eyes and ears for government, and they would have access to our union, to the inner workings of our union, in which someone who lived through COINTELPRO, I would say the last thing anybody, my family's been persecuted for 4 generations for labor activities. The last thing you want to do is invite Big Brother in to overlook how your progressive social movement is operating.
Well, I'm going to defer to our wonderful 2 attorneys, but I would hope that you would be willing to meet with them, and they're going to let you know if they feel that that's valuable. I certainly would expect so. And I would hope that you would at least identify the person who told you, so that when they call the union, and you'll let them know how to do that, that they could at least ask to meet with that individual. But I'm going to defer to Mick and Dave.
I don't know if you heard that, Barbara. That was when you asked that question. He said absolutely.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't hear that. It's a little bit difficult to hear Mick and Dave on my end, and I've been told by your producer, your tech person, that you can't adjust the volume for those of us who called in. Okay.
Basically, I would ask if Mick and Dave could speak louder into their phone in order so that Barbara can hear you.
Sure.
Thank you.
So would Mick or Dave like to say anything?
Yeah, this is Dave. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. Mike, I really appreciate you being on the show, and this is a very important story. What I would like is that you would meet with the lawyers committee, or at least some of us, Mick Harrison, myself, and a few others, and we could basically discuss this in private. There are certain things that probably aren't for public at this time, and we could get a little bit maybe more into some of the details and maybe nitty-gritty that may be not appropriate to discuss in a public setting. But so I think Barbara asked you the question, and I'll follow up with that as far as whether you would like to talk with us on a private conference line, so we could basically be relaxed and nobody's listening except us 3 or 4, and go back and forth and try to distill this and find out the appropriate avenue to address this concern, which is a mighty big concern. And,
so after, pardon me, so after this conversation, we'll exchange contact information and work out a time to speak.
Okay. Right, and I'd just like to point out that I believe that both you and Dave, anyway, are in the New York, New Jersey area, so you You wouldn't even have to put the information out over electronic phone line.
Yeah, because that could be arranged too, and I'm sure Mick would would like to be in there. I'll let him speak for himself. But Mick, why don't you express your concerns, and we'll go from there.
Okay, and Mike, thanks again on behalf of all of us for being willing to share this information, which could be quite important. I agree with Barb that the next steps would be for you to have a sit down with us, and I'd be happy to join Dave in meeting with you basically anywhere, anytime, to unpack this a little further. And it's probably, given the sensitivity of the issue, most appropriate that we do that more detailed conversation at least initially in a private interview. But I also agree with Barb that the next step would likely be developing an affidavit, or what we call in the federal system a declaration, witness declaration under oath, where you share what you know. And let me reassure you that the information you're providing is important. And even though if we were preparing for a trial, for example, your secondhand information might be less important, we're not in that mode at the moment. We're in a situation where we have submitted evidence to the U.S. Attorney to give to a federal grand jury, a special grand jury, and the grand jury is an investigative body that has the authority to basically pursue investigative leads with subpoena power and other options they have under law that we don't have. And so they are in a better position to develop this evidence. And the fact that it's secondhand is not in any way a deterrent to the grand jury looking at it. You would be, I think, assisting the grand jury in providing them these leads, and they would have the power to then talk to other witnesses where your information might lead them. And, it's their job to do that. So even though in other circumstances, secondhand information, sometimes called hearsay informally, and sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't legally hearsay, but in some situations it's less useful, but this is not one of those situations. So just be assured that your information, even in the form that you have it secondhand, is very useful for the proceedings we have going. So I look forward to talking with you in person at your next opportunity, and when Dave can manage it. But I think what you have done so far is very important and very public interest minded, and I appreciate your willingness to do that for the public good. And we'll see if we can help you, get your information to the right entities so it can be properly acted on.
On that note, I want to allow for station identification.
You're listening to WIOF-LP Woodstock 104.1 on your FM broadcast receiver. The program is the Woodstock Truth Squad with Steve Romine hosting, and we have a number of guests on the phone. And Steve, if you want to continue.
Yeah, go ahead, Mick. Would you like to continue saying any more?
Well, I have a number of questions for you, Mike, but I agree with Dave that those questions may be better asked in our face-to-face meeting, and then we might at some point have a follow-up program on the air where we can, after we get the details, decide what is best publicly disclosed in the moment. Ultimately, our goal, as I expect you understand, is public disclosure. The Lawyers Committee's mission is accountability and transparency regarding 9/11, but when you're dealing with investigation of serious crimes, and that's certainly what our grand jury petition is about, there are, sensitive moments when you don't talk publicly as you're developing the evidence, but you wait and talk after that evidence is fully developed, and you make sure your witnesses are protected and the information is secured. And I think we have to be cautious in how we proceed on this. I do have a clarifying question for you, if you wouldn't mind. You had mentioned that you heard this story after 9/11 about the access to the Trade Center prior to 9/11 by this crew that came in and wasn't required to follow the normal protocols of signing into your log and having supervision and so forth. You mentioned this was apparently a Saturday evening event. Did I hear you correctly in saying that the story, as it was relayed to you, involved this unusual crew coming in only on Saturday evenings?
That is correct. And while it seems suspicious that because it's the deadest shift of the week, there's really only a skeleton crew on, and the operators of the equipment. It also would be a time where if you were doing major repairs, you would want to be doing, even on the telecommunications equipment, you'd want to be doing it when your tenants aren't actually trying to access their phone lines or computer lines and stuff. So it's not out of the ordinary that this might have happened. What's totally an anomaly is that it's not a vetted contractor whose insurance is on file, with the city of New York, and they're licensed to work and all this other stuff. The fact that there are people with no insignias on their outfits and they're showing up, and there's management is saying there should be no we want no record. Now management would you should understand, if the building, if anything happened, the owners of the building, they want those logs to be able to be presented as evidence, so that, and 9 times out of 10 they would hang the engineer for making a mistake, so they get the owners off the culpability for whatever accident or mishap happened, and then the union has to protect the man. So every party that's involved here wants this record to be there because it protects their interest, the owner's interest, the insurance company that's insuring the building, it doesn't, they don't want to know that a contractor worked on the building that didn't have the proper licenses in the state of New York or the city of New York to work in there. So there's no party involved in this that does not have a very strong interest in having a physical, legal record kept of all parties that come in and operate or work on mechanical or any other infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
Could I ask you, Michael, if you were told by any of these crew who actually escorted these people in what they were wearing? You mentioned they didn't have any insignia or identifying label or whatever patch, but what were they wearing? Do you know?
I believe coveralls, and for some reason I'm thinking he said they were black, but I can't swear to that. But it wouldn't be uncommon for workmen that come in. They could be wearing uniform. They could be wearing workers' clothes, or they could be wearing overalls. Or a if they're going into a very clean area, they might even be wearing suits that don't carry any dust on them, that they put over. But when they walk in the door, the patch on their shirt is going to say, Acme Plumbing. It's going to say Comcast. It's going to say, and you're going to have an ID from your known employer, and it's going to match the work order that tells the security and the engineering detail to allow the people into the premises. So when people show up and you don't take their ID, and their truck doesn't say, Acme Pump Company, you just say, what is this? But again, prior to the events, because of the nature of this particular building, and that it was owned by the Port Authority, and they actually had variances that they were able to get away with some things like their asbestos. Anybody else in the city of New York would have had their asbestos removed. Okay, it would have cost a fortune, but because the Port Authority was their own animal, they were able to sometimes bypass the normal protocols to some degree. So when this building was changing hands, a crew might not have thought, they might have said, management's doing something, whatever. Someone from the union, the shop steward, if I had been the shop steward on that job, I would say, nonsense, we're not going to have this. I don't want my man who's working midnight to 8 to allow someone in the building, and he can't put it in his book. If the damn thing goes up, it's a fire in that closet, I don't want my man to be responsible. So it would have become a union issue. And sometimes you then hear back, listen, it's in transition, management's asking for a favor, and everybody, and you're not really breaking any law because the Port Authority is their own animal. They can do whatever the heck they want anyway. So it's a gray area. Just do it. And it might be done, even though it makes no sense at all. But certainly, the men would be like scratching their heads as to why this is happening. But then afterwards, when the event happens, you're like, well, now this really looks suspicious. So from my standpoint,
now in your first interview where you were Mark Anonymous, and by the way, all three of us from the Lawyers Committee have read the transcript today again of that interview, and it was great also. You mentioned, I believe, that, there went the question out of the bubble in my brain. Let me ask the other question. The reason I asked, and then maybe it'll come back, the reason I asked about what they were wearing is, I don't know if you're aware of this, but your information tracks beautifully, perfectly almost, if not perfectly, with information that has been claimed publicly, in fact, in a sworn juror affidavit by Susan Lindauer. And Susan Lindauer was a second cousin of Andrew Card, who was the President George W. Bush's White House Chief of Staff, the guy who whispered in his ear, in the Florida classroom. And she worked as a CIA contractor for a top CIA case officer named Richard Fuse. And Susan Lindauer has gone public in a sworn juror affidavit, and we infer that her source was Richard Fuse and therefore the top echelons of the CIA, that there were, in fact, these kinds of crews at precisely the weekend late night shift that you're referring to that came in and were witnessed to be doing X, Y, and Z in the building. So your testimony and hopefully testimony of more direct source witnesses in the union that hopefully we'll be able to interview and get affidavits from tracks very well with other information that we in fact have.
That's encouraging that there is another party that knows, because this information has been out there. Okay, it's been out there since probably the week after the event. It started surfacing by a month after the event. I'd heard it at the next union meeting, and by the Christmas union meeting in early December, I'd actually met one of the men. And so it just would boggle my mind that anybody would have knowledge of something like this, and it wouldn't be a line of questioning, and it wouldn't be in any evidence, and it wouldn't be any documents, especially if there were a legitimate answer as to who, it's quite possible that there was, way up high, the Port Authority had, whatever it was, if someone okayed it somewhere, there's got to be a record.
I remember the question I was going to ask you in the transcript from your first interview back on January 25th of 2016 on this station with Steve. You mentioned that, to the best of your recollection, talking to these other men who actually escorted in these crews, that what you actually said was between 2 and 3 months, or 2 or 3 months before 9/11. Do you have any more specificity on that, number one? And do you have certain knowledge or not that this happened actually during, at the time that Silverstein was the new owner?
I'm not clear as to what the timeline of the ownership of the building was, but I do know that this was, I'm not sure if it was every single Saturday night, but it was a regular event on the Saturday night to Sunday morning shift, midnight Saturday night to 8 a.m. Sunday morning, and this was a regular thing on the Saturday nights for approximately 3 months leading up to the event.
Okay, approximately 3 months. Very good. So
that would be something, anywhere from 10 to 15, 8-hour events on a Saturday or Sunday night. would be the most, like, as again, I wasn't a member of that crew, but I feel pretty good about what I'm saying because it really, it's etched in my memory, and quite frankly, if it had been third-hand information, I wouldn't have mentioned it to anybody. I know a guy in the union who knows a guy who escorted them. No, the man sat there and told me the man's upset because, like, two guys he worked with, that he knew really well were dead, and his boss.
Right. They died. Those three who died.
Forgetting the two other men's name. Vincent. I just know that Vinny DeLeo was the chief, and his story was really compelling because he had done his job. He had secured his equipment. And then he left the building. And just being the kind of man he was, is like, okay, the emergency's over, but the place is, it's a mess. Whatever's going, let me go back in and help. We've been given the all clear, so the guy goes back in to assist.
Do you know which of the two buildings he went back into?
I don't know. I'm not clear about that. Okay. And again, the specifics of the events of the Saturday nights is very clear in my mind. A lot of the other information and context isn't as clear for me. I did not work in that building. So I couldn't even tell you the specific nuances of how the various men did their jobs. You make certain rounds. Oh yeah, the helper, he comes on and he takes his clipboard and he goes to this and checks a pressure station, then he goes to that pumping station, then he goes through this thing, and he's checking off all these things. There's various protocols as to how a shift unfolds, each one. And the men divided to work as they will, but it would all be in the log. Unfortunately, in this situation, I imagine all the logs were destroyed because they were paper logs, logbooks. The legal documents were probably all burned in the conflagration. The security logs as well as the engineer's logs. However, there would certainly be records external to the building of who the men are who worked and at what times and when, because those are payroll records. But all there is really is at this point to substantiate this would be getting a hold of one or more of these people that have actual knowledge or walked with a crew of 3 or 4 people and open the door for them, and then and that since it happened so many times over and over again, it had to have been more than one person that was doing this, and it had to have been a fairly regular thing. So I don't think unless there is some reason why people wouldn't want to speak to this, it seems like the information is right there. It's just a matter of the proper research being done, and now that you have corroborating story from two parties, any way that we can help maybe get specific people who did the admitting these parties in that actually did it, that if they will come forward, then I think you've got a legitimate line of evidence and questioning to open up there.
Well, that's what we all hope. So back to Dave and Mick.
Well, this is Mick. I have just one other question for you that I think we can ask while we're on the air. That most of my questions probably should wait. But the person who described these crews to you firsthand that he or she had witnessed, did they say whether the crews coming in on Saturday evenings were they carrying anything with them? Did they have bags? Did they have tools? Did they have equipment? Anything like that?
I can't say specifically. I remember my recollection now as them being described as work crews coming in vans, and that they and they're wearing these jumpsuits. Sounded to me like overalls, and they were nondescript and possibly black, and probably just with the tool belts around them. But then certainly when you do any job, you bring materials in. Let's say you're just replacing some circuitry in the telephone closets. That would be a normal job. You'd have 50 units that you're going to pull out and take back to the shop, and the 50 new models are going in, and there you are. And so it would, again, in a situation like this, just speculatively, it stands to reason that yes, there are not only tools, but there are materials that are being more than likely, used. I mean, if you replace a screw, you got to carry the screw into it with you, And if you're doing something on 75, 100 different locations over the course of 12 weeks, you're bound to be carrying something in. But again, we'd have to hear from the men and women who actually were there at the time. Just knowing that they're there is helpful, but I can speak to standard operating procedure for the industry as a licensed engineer and someone that's, like I said, basically my family wrote contracts for that industry for, for the last 115 years in New York City.
115 years. Did you yourself, Michael, ever work as an operating engineer in either of the towers?
No, I didn't work in either of the towers, and I wasn't in them very often. I remember I had an engagement dinner, my first marriage at Windows in the World. But my father, as I said, he's passed on. He had actually organized the job and for the operating engineers, and then I believe Local 94 and Local 30, they do the same job in the same business, but the way that they divide it up is Local 94 has all the office spaces and Local 30 has everything else, like Madison Square Garden, legit theaters, any industry, any ABC and CBS, places like that. So because this Port Authority building was a Port Authority building and it had a transmitter on the roof, that entitled Local 30 to have some engineers there, but the main body of engineers were these Local 94 engineers, and then there were some operating engineers who worked for the Port Authority who were there, probably a civil service of some sort. But the main infrastructure was in fact operated by the Local 94 guys, and they were the ones who were charged with admitting, supposedly these contractors.
Okay, so what you've just mentioned, which is new to me anyway, is that, if I heard you correctly, that the Port Authority had its own separate operating engineers. Is that correct?
I believe that there were three. Yeah, the way I understand it, Local 94 had the bulk of the staff that operated most of the public, the towers and most of the spaces, but there were a couple of engineers from Local 30, because technically the transmitter being on the roof, and because the Port Authority actually owned the building, they didn't mainly do the operating, but they had a couple of their own engineers probably monitoring something, but they were not. So
by their own engineers, you're meaning, I believe, that they were independent of either 30 or 94.
Yes, they would. They would have been operating engineers, like your basic Homer Simpson, someone supervising and operating infrastructure in a plant and maintaining it, but their credentials might not have been City of New York. They would have been Port Authority, and their paychecks were signed by, and again, they probably wouldn't have had the because of contractual separation of the three unions, that what machinery each group is responsible for. If Local 94 had control of all of these spaces, it wouldn't be an engineer from either of the other two unions that would go to these telecom closets. So it's like the three entities have like their little niche as to what they do, but the bulk of the public spaces and all of, in fact, like the fire protection equipment and stuff was under the control of the Local 94 operating engineers.
So which operating engineers would have had jurisdiction over the telecom spaces that were involved?
It would have been the Local 94 engineers, because they were in office towers.
I see.
If it had been, let's say, a telecom room that was in a studio attached to a transmitter in the tower, it may have actually, the air conditioning for that may be supplied by like a Local 30 guy. I don't even know why the Port Authority had their own engineers in there. The licenses to operate the machinery and the chain of custody was supplied through the 94 engineers. But I did know that all three entities, let's face it, I hate to say it, but some of these big, state and off budget, they're kind of boondoggles to some degree. You need a certain amount of men and women with licenses by the fire department to make it legal to have these public spaces run because of the equipment that's in them. But after that, and those are the people that legally are responsible. They have chain of custody for the building. They have chain of custody.
And I have one other question, and then I'm going to defer to everybody else for the rest of this segment. But one other burning question, obviously, forgive the pun, is that there, if I understand it, there was a very extensive fireproofing project in the towers. And would operating engineers need to escort the fireproofers?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean when the building was constructed and the asbestos was originally sprayed on when the steel structure.
No, I'll let Mick or Dave clarify what I'm talking about.
Was there an abatement that happened?
Yes, there was an abatement.
Okay, which is interesting because I know that this was a major problem with that building. If the Port Authority didn't own it, that building would have been a mess to take all the asbestos out of. And it wouldn't have been legal to leave it in and not have it encapsulated somehow. So the situation would not have even existed were it not for the fact that the Port Authority had their hand in this.
Yeah, I don't believe I'm talking about removing asbestos. I believe there was an active fireproofing activity. But I'll let
I'm not sure what you mean by fireproofing, but if anybody else has more information, I'll be happy to hear it.
Mike, I wanted to ask you about the basement area. So was Union 94, was that one of their areas, their primary area, or wouldn't it be Local 30? Would it be down there? Who would be overseeing that area in 94? And would they be overseeing it with reference to the elevators also?
General practice specific owners might have specific policies, but the way that stuff is done in the city of New York is fairly uniform because all of the elevator mechanics are union. All of the operating engineers are union. Everybody respects everybody else's jurisdiction and whatnot. So if you just repeat the question, the elevator, what would normally happen is if, let's say on a job that I was on, a call at number 6 elevators out, blah, 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 I might go up to the elevator machine room and just open the door and see if there's a warning light or something, but I wouldn't actually touch anything. And I'd only be doing that because when the elevator mechanic, there's not an elevator mechanic in each building in Manhattan. They're people that like have a little radius and they have a beeper on them and they go from job to job as stuff calls them. They're running from one building to another all over Manhattan all day. And so, the guy from Otis Elevator is going to be here in a half hour. You want to meet him in the lobby and take him up to the elevator machine room. And if he needs anything, let us know. But pretty much, and then he'll go do his thing and then he'll leave, and my job would only be to make a visual inspection to make sure that nothing that dangers the building is wrong in their elevator machine room. I wouldn't really touch anything in it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, I was concerned though also with the basement area. Is that under the jurisdiction basically of the of Union 94, and what would they be doing down there? What would 94 be doing down in the basements?
I can't answer the specific question because I don't. There are literally in those towers there were probably hundreds of mechanical areas. You can't pump water all the way up those floors. You have to pump it up a certain number of floors. It is a tank, and you got to pump it higher. But yeah, there's a central plant. There are several central plants, and each of them have operating engineers in them. And yes, there would be there'd be equipment and mechanical and electrical spaces in the basements and sub-basements of the towers. I didn't work in the building, but in any other office building, like I worked at ABC's corporate headquarters in Midtown Manhattan for years. It was only like a 50-something story office building, was half the height. But yeah, like I've got the cooling towers on the roof that I'm responsible for. I've got air handlers in the middle of the building that I'm responsible for. There's every single floor has fire sprinkler shutoff valves, including in the basement levels. So yes, the engineer that is holding his ticket for that building, yes, there's a sprinkler control valve that you can physically turn on and turn off the water to that sprinkler loop for every single floor. Yes, there's a reason for a local 94 man to be there. Is there, are there sump pumps down there that are pumping water out of the body? Yes, okay, our guys got to go down there and grease them. But can I tell you specifically what those areas were? No. But that's what our job is. I mean, every piece of, usually every piece of plumbing, fire protection equipment, refrigeration, air handler, there's filters that need to be changed in some of the lower level areas that ventilate air out of a parking garage, any number of, there's hundreds of fans and pump stations and small auxiliary refrigeration machines for little computer rooms here and there that need additional cooling. So yeah, there's equipment everywhere, and the men and women would be working all through those towers, doing maintenance on regular schedules for these hundreds of, there's files with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards of pieces of equipment, what this piece of equipment does, what all the parts are in case you have to order the parts. And there's a rotating maintenance schedule, and there's inspection schedule. Every shift, a lot of this infrastructure has to be, a person has to walk through and make a notation that, that everything is clear in the space and everything is functioning in the space. And, I hear a belt squeaking on that fan in that space, and this information that's collected. So specifically what part of the basement, a local 94 engineer might be in, he probably would have the right to be in every single area if need be, because every single area is served by the air handlers, and every single area is served by the fire protection equipment.
And so there would not be an exception to that for instance, the generator room in the basement of the towers.
Now this is interesting. On most jobs that I've worked on, there has only been one group of engineers working, and so, but what would always be, usually always be part of our equipment, would be the backup generators, and that would be our job. You've got to test, you're on a routine schedule. You've got to fire up the emergency generator every Sunday afternoon, blah, blah, blah. It happens on your shift, and you've got to do maintenance on it because if the equipment is ever needed. So yes, unless for some specific reason, this piece of equipment was jurisdictionally assigned to one of the other unions, for reasons that I would not know, it would fall under the people that are running the house, and in this case, it was the local 94 engineers. So okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's an important room based upon testimony from up to 24 witnesses in the basement of World Trade Center 1.
Now you may do further investigation and start, and you may find out, for some odd reason in this particular plant everything belonged to 94, but there was a guy from the Port Authority who held the ticket, and he was the one that, for the emergency generator. I can't answer that question. It's a possibility because there's more than one engineering entity, but someone, more than likely from the main, the people that were running the main infrastructure would have been responsible for the backup power.
Well, one of the main contributions that I'm quite sure you can make to the Lawyers Committee and the overall effort, and that would also, of course, be true of a more direct source, who was your source, and that would be to think and maybe make a list for our attorneys of the kinds of documents that could be requested, and Freedom of Information Act requested, and the offices, the documents. For instance, you mentioned the time logs, or the personnel office, the timekeepers. They would know who was on what shift in the building on what days on those Sundays. So
right.
any kinds of records that we could subpoena or request
And let's I don't know. I mean, you're the attorneys. Let's actually discuss that off the air, because again, if there's anybody interested in shutting down lines of questioning, just the fact that I mentioned that there would be a time record, well, I don't know by law how long those records need to be kept, so let's any documentation of who, what, where, and how that might exist. And personally, I mean, I'd be interested in knowing, were any security logs or engineering logs ever recovered? Was every single one of these books, you know what these are? These are bound. They're like 18 inches tall. Each page is numbered. They're hard covered. They're standard journals and they're legal documents. And when you have a new one, you the date that it starts on this date, because you used up the last page of the previous journal, and then then you start the start date, and then these things all go in chronological order in a file, so that if, as an engineer, I ever have to look back, well, what the heck happened here 2 months ago? Oh, wait a minute, this contractor did something here 2 years ago. I remember I worked that day. Let me go back and look in the logs from 2 years ago from that, and you would find this information. It would be on site. So, again, much of it, most of it, any of it may have been destroyed, but who knows what evidence was recovered and does exist. Any engineering log for the months leading up to this might just, even though you're told not, you never know. Like if I was the engineer and management told me and I was the shop steward and they said, don't put anybody, I was the kind of guy that actually I would honor my contract, and I would be the one, I would actually put something in a log, because I'm the shop steward, and let them try and fire me for this because I know there's a law against them telling me not to put this in my log. So, but again, the trail.
There might even be a log entry saying don't put it in the log.
Right. Some wiseacre who's trying to just, like management wants a favor, and you're like, okay, well, management can have a favor, we'll do whatever. But let me tell you something, I'm covering my butt here because I don't want to be held liable if, a piece of equipment is damaged, or whatever.
Mike, have you ever spoken to any of your colleagues about the apparent electricity shut down in both towers the weekend before 9/11? Are you familiar with that at all?
No, I don't know the specific history of the case and what happened, but again, if there were power outages or power disconnections or power shutdowns, again, whoever is responsible for the emergency generator, if there was, would have to log if the generator came on because of a shutdown, and if they were supposed to do something because something was planned, then it would be in a log, and a man or a worker would remember the anomaly. Oh yeah, I remember that day. Blah blah blah. Yeah.
Would Union 94 would that come under the auspices of their responsibilities, or would that be electrical unions, etc.?
It depends on the specific. Again, it depends on the specific job. Like, in most of the jobs that I've worked on, any electrical service that goes to any of my equipment, any pump that's pumping water through a chill water or a heating system or through a fire protection system, like all those things would be, my specific responsibility. I think I kind of lost the tail end of your question there.
I just want to say something, and that is that for anybody who's just tuning in, we have with us 3 lawyers from Lawyers for 9/11 Inquiry Committee here with us on the conference call, and we also have Michael Mulvey, the operating engineer, who worked in Manhattan, and we're discussing the events preceding the 9/11 tragedy. So take it from there.
And Mick, I just had this was such an anomaly in your. I mean, as far as people coming in without any kind of identification on their overalls or without any kind of card, not being asked for a card, and being taken into the building and left alone. In your experience there, Has that ever happened before? Other than I think I saw you mentioned an example in your when you were on the show some years ago, that maybe somebody would bring their daughter in or something, showing them around. But in your experience, is this such an anomaly that you can't legitimately explain it? Is that what you're saying? It's just like, come on, what happened here?
Yeah,
How can this happen?
I mean, if if my wife was meeting me, maybe I have a parking spot in the loading dock as a perk for my job, working off hours, and my wife's meeting me in the city or whatever, and we're leaving the car in the loading dock for a couple hours, but they would appear at in most cases, especially any building that's a fairly sensitive building, like One Federal Plaza, the World Trade Center, a city hospital. Usually you will have to say, I'll get my beeper will go off, or my phone in the engineer's office will go off. Hey Mulvey, your wife and kid are upstairs, and and secure, up at the entrance. You want to send someone up to get them. And if I couldn't leave my post for whatever reason, I would send one of my coworkers, because as a licensed engineer, often you have to be in the physical proximity of the refrigeration. So you would send a mechanic or a helper up to escort your person down, or you would go yourself. And I would probably know the security guard at the desk, and oh yeah, that's my wife. Who else would marry me? And then she would write her name in the security log, and maybe my daughter would, 4-year-old would want to write her name too or something. But there would be, it's very rare and very going back really old school that you would just have someone walk in the boiler room door because he was a buddy of the engineer. I mean, that, that stuff just, it really doesn't happen under any corporate model of property management. You have control over who's coming in. If my kid, God forbid, tripped and fell in a mechanical space because I didn't have that entered in the law. This is it's a rigmarole. This is, so basically, procedures are normalized and they don't interfere with people. You might have a personal guest, but that personal guest would have a reason for being there. They'd have ID and they would be escorted. You would never just let someone go wandering around, in, some area of a building, unless it was a public space where anybody's allowed to be, without it, what kind of boyfriend would I be if I let, my friend into the building and just left him in a dirty, hey, you go figure out what goes down on, there are, and especially in a place that's a high profile, there are very strict and with consequences. There are cameras on, there may be a door to the engine room that's not the main door, but I'm sure there's a camera on it. There may be a fire exit that could be opened by somebody, but I'm sure there's a camera. And why would you be sneaking your friend in through, this, this stuff just doesn't fly. It's just, none of it does. So I don't see any, well, I guess that's your job. You're the ones who are supposed to look at this from every single angle, but I don't see any angle that justifies any part of this story. If even half of what this person has said is accurate, it's well out of any normal business and acceptable business practice, and it violates not only insurance regulations but probably several city codes. You just don't do it. You've got a good job. You've got a great job. New York's a good union town, and these jobs are really good jobs to have. I wish more Americans had them, but you don't mess around with that. You have responsibility. And now you're scrutinized. I'm sure that building had a heightened review of their security protocol after the truck bombing. That this wasn't like the biggest building and big, and all the high profile entities in that building, and they would fire an engineer on the spot for, it'd be hard to defend if you compromise the safety of a mechanical area with a civilian or anything like that. You're going to get bounced. You may lose your license to work in the trade.
Michael, you mentioned cameras. I know that you didn't work in the building, but from your experience, there would have likely been security cameras, CCTV cameras with recordings that might have survived in all of these mechanical and communication spaces, probably.
I can't speak to that at all. And normally in most places that I've worked, there wouldn't be cameras inside the mechanical areas. What there would be is cameras on the thoroughfares that lead to the places where you go into a controlled space. In other words, I'm walking down a public hallway, and then I'm turning and I have to go into this room that only I have a key for. And so, there'd probably be a camera on that hallway that would show, there goes an engineer into the building at 12:05 a.m. Oh, look, and here he comes out 3 hours later. What did he do in there? I don't know. He carried in his bedroll. He took a nap. No, or he carried in his pipe wrench and he fixed something. And then the log would justify what the person was doing in that space. But, what happened inside the space may not be on camera, but certainly access to most, especially in a building of high profile, again, and after there had been something done, that there's not going to be a way for someone to come off the street and just have a door pushed open and then they can suddenly be in the boiler room. That's not going to happen. Security, and if it did, then you would just have to say that the owners did not want that to be seen, because their main goal is to lower, their culpability in the event of anything. So they want to be able to know who's going to what spaces. They want to be able to hang the engineer who made the union man, let the union defend them, but he made the choice to do X, Y, and Z and let that person in. Management's assuring that their space has integrity. I'm then ensuring that my mechanical spaces have integrity because my license and my livelihood is attached to it and my safety.
So
don't forget.
In the high-rise building, for instance, that you were in, I believe you said it was the ABC building. To your knowledge, there weren't recording cameras in the actual mechanical spaces, for instance, themselves.
No, like there'd be like a place you might have to bring tools in, the loading dock, okay? Areas to approach the engine room, but would there be a camera in the engine room? No. I assume in certain places, like maybe Rikers Island, I think Local 30, my dad's, the union I started out in, the local I started in, my dad we had engineers on Rikers Island. I would imagine that they had probably higher, levels of security and scrutinization of the workers there. But the norm is not, or it hadn't been. I'm now out of the trade for about, I got out in, I think 2005 was when I retired. And I was working at the CUNY Graduate Center at that time. I was the shop steward, and crew of like 25. And I was well known because the officers who ran Local 94, my father was a very well respected man in the industry, and they all knew him very well. They were all at his funeral. They all knew me. There was the officers of the various locals that contribute to the engineer pool in New York City. They're not at war with each other. The cooperative, and delineation of these and this local gets those types of contracts, and this is the reason why. And Local 94 gets all the office space, and anything that's got a transmitter on it, or it's like a public performance space belongs to this union. And there's not these turf. I mean, there were turf wars years ago, but this is pretty, and standard practices. There's standard practices.
Okay, I'm wondering if Mick has more questions.
Well, I have just a clarification and a comment that sort of punctuates what Mike is telling us about the normal procedure. First of all, for Steve's benefit, Barbara's already disclaimed, but she's not an attorney, but she is one of our board members. So we have 3 board members from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry on this call, and Dave and I, of course, are lawyers. Barb is serving more as an investigator for us, among other talents, including writing. But my comment is that some years back, I did some litigation against the Army for some nonprofits and citizen and environmental organizations related to chemical weapons disposal. And we did quite a bit of discovery in those federal litigations, and got a lot of the protocols and standard operating procedures, and had a lot of testimony about how the Army and its contractors, which included a number of engineers and other technical folks, how they handled their work and their access to sensitive areas. And of course, they had a number of sensitive areas with chemical weapons. So pretty much what Mike is describing rings real true to me in terms of, the keeping of the daily logs, the fact that someone might actually make an entry in the log, even if they were told to make no entries in the log. They might say something in the log that would be a cue to the reader that they'd been told not to put certain information in the log. And occasionally you would see an entry made in the log sort of out of time sequence, which indicated someone was sort of, for whatever circumstance, forced to add something they had initially omitted. So those logs can be very enlightening, and they're taken very seriously, and a violation of the protocol for recording key events and logs could well get someone fired. I mean, so Mike is, I think, telling a story that is consistent with my own experience in investigating those particular cases. So, and they did have key cameras on key access areas, and the description that the camera would, watch the key access points, I think also rings true. Now, with chemical weapons, they also had cameras in areas where they're actually doing work for some obvious reasons, mostly safety and to record what might happen. But so, Mike's story to me sounds very credible and very helpful in the level of detail. So I thank you again, Mike, and I look forward to exchanging our contact information here in a moment.
Yeah, well, not to be flip, but I do want to say it's really been enjoyable for me to speak with people who are so knowledgeable, and also to have 2 high-priced attorneys at my disposal here without me being billed for anything.
Oh, I forgot to mention there'll be an invoice. Just kidding.
Hey, I'm a pro se. I'm a pro se litigant.
Right, exactly. You are, yeah. Exactly.
Wow, this is riveting. Listening to this information. Mike is so well spoken too. It's amazing. Should be more than an operating engineer, some kind of scholar.
I'm actually an undergrad at Ithaca College. I dropped out of high school in 1976 and went to work in my dad's labor union. But I was always very well read, and now I'm on scholarship at Ithaca, studying politics, journalism, and media.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, perfect.
And a musician too, to boot. He sang a song here before you all came on that was pretty incredible.
Could I ask, if it's appropriate, how you, Steve, know Michael?
Yeah, I actually wanted to tell you this story. It was kind of unique, and it brings Richard Gage into the story, into the evening, even though he's not here. Couldn't be here because he's on honeymoon. But Richard came to Woodstock. We arranged for him to come up. I actually was in New York City at one of the 9/11 events, and I think it was the premiere of his new movie at the time, Firefighters, Architects and Engineers Exposed the Myths of 9/11. It was I forget the exact name, but you know the movie I'm talking about. Right. And great movie. And I had met Richard there at that event and asked him if he would come to Woodstock and do an event here in Woodstock and play that movie also. And I had been to other events with him around 9/11, but this is the first time I actually connected with him personally. and he came up to Woodstock, and he stayed. We housed him here in Woodstock, and we did an event at Mountain View Studio here in Woodstock, and so for that event, I was passing out flyers in front of the natural food store here in Woodstock, where a lot of traffic is, foot traffic. And I was passing out flyers on the event, the eve of the night before the event, and I handed it. Mike came walking along, and I said, "Hey, you got to check this out. We got a great event happening tonight. Richard Gage is coming to Woodstock." And I said, this is about 9/11, and he said, "Oh, I know all about that." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Maybe you know more than me." And he said, "Tell me what you know." And he started telling me, and I said, "You know what? You've got to come on my show. You have got to come on my show because we're all about 9/11 here on the Woodstock Truth Squad. I mean, was the origin of our name is around the Truth Movement, and so that's how we met. And then we did a telephone interview.
Correct.
A telephone interview, and it was a great interview. It was also a riveting interview. And so that's how I got to meet him, and boy, am I glad I did.
And if it's appropriate, how did you meet up again?
Oh yeah, this is appropriate. This is very appropriate.
Well, I had just done a kids concert at the local Woodstock library with a friend of mine to kick off their summer reading program for the kids. And then I came in and I had to make a copy of something, so I used the copier in the library since they'd let me make a copy for free, and a great library in Woodstock. And I left a copy of my tax return on the copy machine, and Steve actually brought it to my house, and I wasn't home, but my neighbor was, and he knew my neighbor for 20 years, and she said, "Oh, I'll give that to Mike." And I didn't even realize I had been in the it was in the print store.
Catskill Art Supply store.
Art Supply, right. I left it there, and I had been talking to Steve, and I realized that I kind of knew him, and I left the thing on the counter. And
here's a little more detail on that. I was making 1,000 copies. Each of my document for my recent litigation is 1,000 pages, and which I served this morning. And so I was in there making 2 sets of these. I have to make 7 sets.
Oh, God.
And so I was making all these copies, and in comes walking Mike, and I knew him from playing music around town. We had big jam sessions next to my house. A neighbor was a musician, and so I knew him by face, but I didn't really remember his name. And I didn't know his last name, but I kind of knew his first name. And so we were talking about a mutual friend of ours, the legendary Pete Rose, musician, who passed away this past year. And we were both talking about how we missed him, and he was a great musician. And in the middle of the discussion about Pete, I said, you got to refresh my memory because I forgot your name. And he said, "My name is Michael Mulvey." And I said, "Michael Mulvey?" I said, "Are you an operating engineer?" Because I only knew him over the phone. And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Oh my God, I've been trying to get a hold of you. Let's do another show."
And quite frankly, the original interview was great, and I was really, it was good for me to be able to, again, contextualize the information here and give it to someone that was trying to get it out there. But quite frankly, I can't tell you how many times I've told the story in person at party, on Facebook, someone arguing with me, and I'm like, I'm just going to tell you what I know. It's secondhand information, but here's some, and people just basically they don't care, or so they have such cognitive dissonance that they can't wrap their mind around the fact that there might be more going on here than the story that we've been told, and so they tell you to jump in a lake, they tell you you're lying, they tell you you're not an American or whatever, because it's freaking them out. And so I've gotten tired of even telling this to anybody but a fireman who I know who was part of this thing, or someone that might actually care. And so I really didn't want to be telling the story anymore because, quite frankly, I didn't know you folks were out there doing them. I mean, I know there are people that have not let go of this thing, just like there are people that haven't let go of, why John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King are dead, But at the end of the day, if nobody's actually doing anything of substance with the information, it's just keeping the trauma not only of what happened then, but of the fact that, I suspect that, I look at the way things are going, and quite frankly, I'm not so sure we won the Second World War anymore. It's like, you don't even, so you just put it to the side and say, it happened. I told everybody I could. I know that the authorities were told, but to have it come up again as this random act of meeting Steve in and leaving my tax thing behind, and and then getting to speak to the three of you, who see now. I don't mind racking my brain and trying to give detailed information of how the industry works, what the laws are that govern the industry, how protocol happens, what the union's response, the fact that you may have to talk to the union's lawyer before you can talk to the man that works for the union, getting you, and someone who appreciates logistics and will actually do the work to try and research or uncover information would make it worth me going back in and really trying to bring additional information, every scrap of information, stuff that I know that wouldn't be common knowledge to an attorney who doesn't work in the industry. Look for this, because when you just...
Mike, everything you're saying is the synchronicity involved is so significant. I know some years ago when I heard of the story, everybody's saying, well, who's the guy? That's what we're saying. Who's the guy? How are we going to talk to him? So we're really looking forward to speaking with you. Your story is very important, and we want to review it with you as best we can. And it has some legs on it, and it goes where it's supposed to go. Now, Mick and I, we have another engagement we have to go to. And we're about 2 minutes late already. So we do want to, maybe Mick has an idea as far as exchanging our telephones and information with you. And thanks, Steve, for inviting us on the show. I guess Barbara can stay on because, but we have to go. So, Mick, what do you suggest as far as us contacting Mike or him contacting us?
Well, if we can go off the air here in just a moment, I think we can do a quick exchange of phone numbers and then have a call maybe tomorrow just to maybe set something up.
All right, can you hold that note for 1 minute? We're going to do a station ID. It's the top of the hour.
You're listening.
Fantastic.
You're listening to WIOF-LP Woodstock 104, 104.1 on your FM broadcast receiver, and the program is the Woodstock Truth Squad with Steve Romine. And right now, the way we will handle this is Barbara Honegger's line will stay on, and I'll take the other two lines off as soon as I lift the receiver. I don't know if it's going to work, though, as far as, Okay, but hold on, please. All right, I've turned down the telephone lines, and I'm going to turn down the mics as well. Maybe we'll play a little music?
Yeah, play Not in My Name.
Okay. So, do you know which album that is?
No. Boomtown?
I don't know. I don't think so. How about Julian?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, folks at home or wherever you're listening, just hang on a moment and we'll get right to you. And here's Tom Pacheco with Julian.
Australia, where the kangaroos run free. The Southern Cross shining on the Aborigines. His parents, they were travelers. He went to 36 schools. He quickly learned to disrespect conformity and rules. He sold his horse and purchased a computer, it was fate, and learned to hack the system straight through the White House gates. Deception, lies, and war crimes, he put them on the screen. He was the greatest hacker the world had ever seen. Julian, 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 always on the run. There's a hitman on your trail. It could be anyone. Julian, 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 the man they tried to smear. They called you Benedict Arnold, but you are Paul Revere. Never in one place for long, constantly maligned, releasing government secrets, one leak at a time. He traveled north to Iceland, exposing every bank. For every fraud committed, each banker walked the plank. Amnesty International gave him an honored prize. His WikiLeaks revealed Guantanamo's dark evil side. 400,000 documents he sent through cyberspace. Too late for any politician to shred or erase. Julian, 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 always on the run. There's a hitman on your trail. It could be anyone. Julian, 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 the man they tried to smear. They call you Benedict Arnold, but you are Paul Revere. Nation corporations called him a terrorist for setting free the truth. For so long they had hid. He's hounded like a fox. More charges will be hurled. He opened up Pandora's box and simply changed the world. Julian, 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 always on the run. There's a hitman on your trail. It could be anyone. Julian, 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 the man they try to smear. They call you Benedict Arnold, but you are Paul Revere. Julian, 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 always on the run. There's a hitman on your trail. It could be anyone. Julian, 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 the man they tried to smear. They call you Benedict Arnold, but you are Paul Revere.
Okay. Yes. What a show we had tonight here, folks. If anybody just tuned in to the latter part of it, do we still have Barbara on the line?
Yes, we do.
We have with us Barbara Honegger on the phone.
We got you.
Hello?
We
Can you hear
have
me?
Barbara Honegger with us on the phone. We had Dave Mieswinkle and we had Mick Harrison. All three of these folks are part of Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And they have tackled the seeking justice for the tragic 9/11 events and bringing the real culprits to justice. And the Woodstock Truth Squad supports them in that endeavor in any way we can. And we also have with us presently Mick and Dave have both had to depart. Now they're not with us anymore on the show, but Barbara's still with us.
Can you hear me, Steve?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Oh, good. I can hear all of it.
And I can hear you now. I'm sorry. And so Barbara, while Mike is outside taking a breather from his heavy testimony here,
right.
Would you like to comment and say a few things?
Well, yeah. First, I have a question, and that is, it's not clear to me whether you, Steve, knew that Mike Mulvey was, when you were at the Xerox machine or wherever you just recently interacted with him, were you aware that he was the same person who has been on your show before?
No.
But how did you learn that? Did you just recognize his voice?
No, listen, he, like I say, I had a house next to me that was a congregation of musicians would play there. And it was a great benefit to me because I love music, and I used to go over there and hang out and listen to live music. You know, people that write music and can play really well. This is Woodstock, and it was a classic scene. And so I went. I saw Mike's face over there once in a while. He's a great musician himself, and that's how I knew him. But I didn't know his last name. I vaguely remember his name is Mike. That's as much as I knew about him. When I had him on the show, I saw him in front of the natural food store when he came walking. At that time, I remember him as having his hair dyed black. It's now silver. For some reason, it didn't register to me, because I wasn't that well acquainted with him. He was one and the same person that I had listened to music. And so when I saw him walk into the print shop, I did recognize him as the great musician that I witnessed playing next door, but I didn't know him as Mike Mulvey. And we recently lost a great musician in town by the name of Pete Rose, whose song I will play at the end of the show. But I said to him, isn't it a loss that we had losing Pete in this community? And we were talking about that for a little while. And I said to him, you got to refresh me on your name because I honestly forgot your name. And he came out and he said, my name is Mike Mulvey. Now, when I had him on the radio show, I did know his name, but I didn't know his face. So,
see that? I thought you thought he was just Mark.
No,
okay.
I knew it. I wouldn't let anybody else know that I knew his real name.
Okay, that explains it then.
Yeah.
You put the name together and the voice together. Okay.
I put and then when he said, my name is Mike Mulvey, I said, are you the operating engineer? And he said, right. I certainly am.
Right, and the fact that, if I understand correctly, his father actually set up the operating engineer system for the World Trade Center towers.
That's
if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. He it's called organizing the job. That there's engineers that build out the tower, and they're operating, and then they sign over custody of the building to the union shop that's voted, to accept the union, as their representative in the process of bargaining. And that's what Dad did for a living, and he wrote contracts. I mean, it was really a fascinating world he lived in. He loved his job more than anything else. He went toe to toe with Mayor Lindsay, city hospitals, and when my dad started organizing, all of the workers in the operating engineers, we all had pensions, but my father's life work over his tenure was assuring that before he retired, every single operating engineer in the city of New York not only had a pension, but they had an annuity fund set up that was linked to hours worked, and then so a man could family person could retire, with $250,000 or $500,000, on top of the pension and their Social Security for all the hours that they put in. And
no wonder he was well loved. Yeah,
I mean, this has been, we know that that the protections that are promised to us constitutionally and the way our system works, it really requires the fourth estate to be an active participant. We don't really have that now. Thank goodness there are now a lot of really, really great independent journalism. I mean, I can't tell you over the last 15 or 20 years how much of an education I've gotten from Amy Goodman's show. And it's an honor to be on this Pacifica network, founded by anti-war activists, but it really is the people that organize in social movements and those that will stand together, for any injustice, societal injustice, and without those social actors and concerned people who work within the legal system and within the government. I'll mention a name. I know I'm taking us away from it, but I'm really the name I.F. Stone, Izzy Stone.
Oh, I know I.F.
Okay,
Stone.
so again, the left is now so disenfranchised by the money, and it's so we've lost so much. But I think even in the real places where people have not had maybe as much understanding of why their lives aren't going well, they're starting to see that these union jobs, like, you mean you actually get paid a living wage and they still give you medical benefits? I have to work at Lowe's and I have to work 3 jobs and I can barely pay my rent. But this is all of these things that we're losing now were hard won by people who put themselves on the line. So many movements intersecting now, and without the attorneys who are willing to work not strictly for their own gain. Okay, you make a lot more money as a defense attorney or a divorce attorney than you're going to make as a public activist protecting whistleblowers and trying to get the government to comply. But without those people who are willing to do that work, we don't have democracy. It's up to us to come forward and to stand up and stand together. So.
That's right. The Lawyers Committee is basically 8 people. Our board is 8 people, myself and Mick and Dave, and Ed Asner, who has been a magnificent social activist and 9/11 Truth activist his entire career. He is on our board. He's amazing. And we have just 4 other people on our board. And we have done this as volunteers. I will tell you, ever since I joined the Lawyers Committee, which is about 3 years ago, about a little bit after Mick, it's been a full-time job, and it's a volunteer job. And it's because we are dedicated to achieving truth and justice for the 9/11 victims, family members, and survivors. We have been grievously lied to by our government. There is no question but that there are significant aspects of 9/11 that had to be an inside job. There is no question about that. And so we are dedicated, and we are now, as Dave Mieswinkle, who is on the call, our president and executive director, likes to say, we, the Lawyers Committee, are now inside the castle, and we have pulled up the drawbridge.
I just want to say to you, Barbara, did you see Jon Stewart's testimony? I'm sure you did, but
I absolutely did. It was riveting.
Wasn't it wonderful?
Oh my God! And not only that, but the testimony of, I believe, Mr. Alvarez, who just passed away. Didn't you just go to his funeral, or you're about to?
No, I didn't go to his funeral.
Oh, I know. Tomorrow I'm doing a show, another radio show, with a gentleman who lives very close to Mr. Alvarez, who was a Detective Alvarez, who was one of the people who testified with Jon Stewart at those congressional hearings, and he just passed away.
On that note, I want to just mention the name of Stephen Orsulich, who was nicknamed Stevie Dread. and he was a sand hog. And he was asked by the union to go in and into the ruins of 9/11, right after it happened, and search for people, for bodies, and to help find people that were still alive. And he's one of those people that passed away, gave his life. He got the lung problem that so many have. And he passed away, and I just want to make mention of his name. He was a good friend of mine, and he was my friend's father in town here. So I want a little honor to him.
Very good. And I did want to mention something very interesting, and that is about timing of 9/11 Truth and Justice. There's so many people who aren't actually on the front lines and in the trenches like the 8 of us on the Lawyers Committee board. 3 of us were on this call, and now I'm still on the call. We're literally in the trenches, in the front lines of this battle, along with the 9/11 victims' family members who, as you know, have sued the Saudi government, the Saudi royal family government. And so for those of us on the front lines, we're often asked by armchair 9/11 truthers who aren't really doing the work, well, why is it taking you so long? Well, the answer to that question is a very interesting combination of it takes a long time to do the research, to get to the point where you have solid information that cannot be questioned. And we didn't want to be doing this until we knew for sure and could prove it. So for anyone who's listening to this call, or Steve, I hope that will the audio of this program be on the internet at some point?
I most certainly will. I'll put it on YouTube if Mike lets me.
Good.
And
Excellent.
and we're going to replay it again Wednesday night here at 9 o'clock, but it only reaches our broadcast area, which is the part of the Hudson Valley. And
some of the most beautiful area of the world. God, it's gorgeous up there.
Yeah.
I saw the Hudson River in the fall from Roosevelt's mansion in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I thought I was looking down at heaven.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
But I will put this on a link and send you the link.
Good. So what I wanted to mention about the timing is that it takes a long time to do research when your entire government is, at least part of it, clearly complicit, and obviously they don't want you to know the truth, that our 9/11 Truth movement is infiltrated, of course, by disinformation agents and people who try to divide us. But the other part of the answer to why now is synchronicity. Exactly what brought the two of you together to make it possible for Michael to be on this show today. Believe it or not, there is, well, I know you do believe it because you just experienced it. That's why we're here today on the show. There are so many unbelievable synchronicities every single day or every single week that move 9/11 Truth and Justice forward. We have never gone back, and when the synchronicities happen, we leap forward. It's almost like the synchronicities are a catalyst that leap us forward. And believe it or not, in a previous incarnation in this lifetime, it's the way it feels, I actually earned the world's first, not just the United States first, but the world's first fully accredited graduate degree in consciousness studies in experimental parapsychology.
You did?
And yes, I did.
Wow.
John F. Kennedy University in Orinda. So, believe it or not, my expertise and focus is on synchronicity.
When did you achieve that?
That was I walked across the stage with Manly Hall, if you recognize who that is. He's world famous in the field, in June of 1981. So I had to actually leave my job at the White House to fly back to California to walk across the stage and get my degree and then fly back to the White House.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Barbara, and I'm glad to know that. Maybe we'll do a show on it.
Oh, I've done many shows on it.
Really? That's
most of the shows I've done on this subject have been on, if you know the program, The Other Side of Midnight, with the host Richard Hoagland and Kid Thea. I've probably been on a dozen of their programs. In fact, what I'll do is I'll send you the link
Oh,
to
great.
the audio of my most recent show on this very subject.
Great. You know what? Also, at another time, at your convenience, I'd love to do a show with you on 9/11, on some of the many facts and details that you know about it.
Well, my experience is focused on the Pentagon. My expertise is the Pentagon, and as you know, I mentioned in my bio at the beginning of the show, you asked me to give my summary bio. I mentioned that for about a little over 16 years, I was the senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School, and also known as NPS. And NPS is billed by the Department of Defense, by the Pentagon itself, as DoD's premier science, technology, and national security affairs graduate research university for the whole country, for the whole nation. And I was the senior military affairs journalist there. So you can imagine the degree of fact-checking I had to do. Everything that I put out has been fact-checked to the hilt. And anyone who's interested in my work on the Pentagon attack on 9/11, which I personally believe, for reasons that are in my documentary on YouTube, I actually believe that the Pentagon attack was the most important and central attack of 9/11. The World Trade Center attacks were more spectacular, and they were designed to be. But without the Pentagon attack on a national, iconic military facility like the original Pearl Harbor that got us into World War II, the Bush-Cheney administration would not have been able to credibly call it a war on terror. It would have been just a bigger attack like Oklahoma City, a domestic attack. It would have been a bigger attack like the 1993 attacks on the World Trade Center 1, right?
Right.
Which killed 5-6 people and injured 1,000, but didn't bring down the building. So without the attack on the Pentagon, they couldn't have called it a war on terror. They couldn't have rolled out their global domination agenda based on the war on terror.
Isn't it amazing? It's the scope of this is so incredible. I want to ask you a question though. Are you in contact with the survivor, the military female survivor? I forget her name. I'm always forgetting. What?
April Gallup.
Yeah, are you in contact with her? I'd love to get her on my show.
She might be willing to be on. I'm not only in contact with her, well, I have been, but she gave me the first under oath videotaped. I swore her up on videotape, a 2-hour videotaped interview, and I will send you the transcript of that so that you can know what her detailed story is. She's never given a more detailed story, and it is shocking. It will blow your mind.
Oh,
and
wow.
then I'll let you know how to get in touch with her.
And also William Rodriguez.
Yes, I know Willie Rodriguez well.
I'd love to have William on the show. I met him at Ground Zero, and I saw him walking around, and I said, "Are you William Rodriguez?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, wow, I can't believe it." And we started talking, and then we ended up taking pictures with him, and he pulled out the key that he had that he saved all the lives with at the World Trade Center towers, and I held the key in one hand, and he had his arm around me with the other, and it was just like a high point for a 9/11 truther. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. He did the same with me. I can send you that photograph, and he let me kiss the key, too. But I would like to let your listeners know that if they're interested in my work on this critical attack of 9/11, the Pentagon attack, what happened there, what really happened there, and what didn't, then you need to go to YouTube and just plug in the search bar at the top, put in Behind the Smoke Curtain, Behind the Smoke Curtain, and you will see my documentary. It has a cumulative 1 million views on YouTube.
Wow.
Just click on the one at the top that has something like 250,000 views, just the one at the top, and there are many under there. There are many people who put it on their own, so it's up there many times. Just click on the one at the top with the most views, about 250,000 views, and watch that, and that will blow your mind. I will tell you that the bottom line of what really happened at the Pentagon, believe it or not, I prove it in that documentary, Behind the Smoke Curtain, on YouTube. The bottom line of the real story at the Pentagon on 9/11 is identical to what really happened at the World Trade Center that Architects and Engineers has proven, and that is, believe it or not, pre-placed explosives. The planes are not what matters either place. It's pre-placed explosives. And that's why April Gallup's testimony is so critically important, because she was inside the outer ring of the west face of the Pentagon, 120 to 150 feet away from the alleged plane impact point, and there were internal pre-placed explosives that went off by her desk, almost killed her and her infant son, 3-month-old infant son, killed many people in her Army area. 8 minutes almost, a full 8 minutes before the official story says Flight 77 was anywhere close to Washington, D.C., while it was still in the air, okay? So the real story at the Pentagon is the same at the World Trade Center, the one that matters, and that is pre-placed explosives with plane impacts as just the cover cause, the cover story.
They're so cunning, aren't they?
They are very cunning.
One of the parts of this whole story, extended story, that's always interested me was the other plane, the plane that was downed in the field, and the problems with the spread pattern. The plane didn't impact the ground; it exploded in the air, and that people saw this, people saw that, and the thing running through my mind is, someone mentioned, well, the plane was turning to go back towards Washington. And I'm thinking to myself, Congress was in session. If that plane would have hit the Capitol or some such thing, then it's game over for democracy because it's martial law, and and the story about how the passengers took it down, and I'm in the back of my mind, and again, I'm sorry to just, there's so much credible information here. I'm sorry to throw my own conjecture out there, but I'm going to. I'm thinking to myself, there's probably some Air Force colonel somewhere who was a career military officer, and even though he was told to stand down, he probably said, we're under attack. That plane's turning back towards Washington. It's a civilian aircraft, but we got to take it out. Like, that's the only thing that made sense to me. And so when I've heard drips and drabs, I'm like, that is credible. That seems credible to me. And that fourth plane.
The plane, Steve, was taken out.
Wait.
In fact, I've spoken to Ginger Gaynor, who was for, I think, 25, maybe even 35 years, a American Airlines flight attendant and purser, and she personally knows a woman named Colleen. I'm not going to give you the full name, but she personally knows the woman who was one of the air traffic controllers at Dulles Airport. Okay, and it turns out that on the morning of 9/11, after the Pentagon attack, and we'll put that aside because we're talking about the Pennsylvania attack, that I don't know if you're aware of this, but this is in my documentary on YouTube, Behind the Smoke Curtain. There was a C-130 plane that was sent to try to identify the so-called Pentagon plane, allegedly Flight 77, and after it left the Pentagon, it was sent to, guess where? Shanksville. And the same pilot of that Air Force, funny you should say that, the same pilot, Steve O'Brien, of that same Air Force, C-130, who was the, quote, official witness, unquote, to claim that he thought a plane had just gone into the Pentagon, even though he didn't see it. He just saw a smoke cloud afterwards. He was then sent to the Shanksville area and became the first so-called official witness to claim that Flight 93 had gone down in Shanksville. And guess what? Colleen, this woman who was an air traffic controller at Dulles Airport outside of Washington, D.C., after the Pentagon attack, they followed that C-130. They could see the blip on the radar screen, and they followed it towards Shanksville, and they saw another plane. They saw the blip for what we're assuming is Flight 93, and then they saw a small plane blip go towards it, and then two tiny blips, which were missiles, leave that plane, which was obviously some kind of a fighter jet. And two very small blips left that smaller blip plane, and those smaller blips went towards the blip that we're assuming was Flight 93, just before the blip for Flight 93 disappeared from the screen. It was shot down.
I can add to that. I have a friend who's a Navy SEAL, retired, and he told me that he had a friend who was a general at Rome Airport in New York, and military base, and he told me how he was upset because, I was talking to him all about 9/11, and it was, blowing his mind. He said, "Let me tell you what I know." He said his friend, who's a general in Rome, had disobeyed the stand-down order and sent a plane, and I'm not exactly sure where it went. I'm assuming it must be the same plane that went to Shanksville, that he sent a plane out, and he was demoted. All the other generals that didn't do anything got raises, and including what's his name that became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But the one who actually disobeyed the stand-down order and sent a plane got demoted, and he was expressing horror to me that his friend had been demoted for protecting the country.
Do you know the general's name?
I don't know the general's name, and I would, if we would track down the guy, the Navy seaman, I could help you with that.
All these.
Yeah, well, that's worth doing. By the way, I'll give you another synchronicity. I don't know how much longer we're in the program. I think about 20 minutes.
Yes.
But another amazing synchronicity, because, as they say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right?
I love that saying. I love that
I know,
saying.
I do too. It's a great Zen saying. Well, it's true. It happens to be true. And so I was on a plane going to, actually to Washington, D.C. to give one of my presentations at our anniversary event for 9/11 Truth conferences in Washington, D.C. And I was on a red-eye flight, and all the lights were out. It was the middle of the night, and early in the morning, wee hours of the morning, all the lights were out in the plane except for my bright light over my laptop on my little tray table in front of me. And this poor couple to my right, a woman to my right and her husband on the aisle, they were trying to sleep, and it was kind of difficult, but I had to do my PowerPoint because I had to give it that coming morning, right? So I had my light on over my tray table with my laptop, and the woman to my right, she would wake up and get something to drink, and she's so close to my laptop she couldn't help but see what was on my screen. And after about an hour of being awake, she would just kind of glance over periodically. She whispered to me, because everybody in the plane was trying to sleep. She whispered to me, and she said, I'm sorry, I couldn't help but see what you're doing. You're doing a PowerPoint about 9/11 at the Pentagon, right? And I said, yes, and I whispered back to her. Can you hear me? I'm kind of whispering now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you clear.
Okay. So we were whispering to each other, and she said, is that right? And I said, yes, that's right. She said, well, why are you doing that? And I told her why I was doing it. And she said, well, I have something I have to tell you. And then she, nudged her husband and woke him up to her right. She said, honey, you got to wake up. You're not going to believe this. Okay. So he wakes up, and then they're both talking to me, and we're in whispers. And she tells me the story. And what she says, and her husband confirmed it, she says that her father was a high, I'm presuming still is, a very prestigious attorney in Washington, D.C. and that she and her husband had flown back not long after 9/11 to Washington, D.C. To be with her father. And while they were there for a few days, there was some kind of a cocktail party that he was going to, that he'd been invited to, and he self-invited them to go along. And at this cocktail party, at the table with the finger food and the wine, whatever, there was a general or a top-ranking military man. Turns out he was a general. And so they started talking to this guy just over the finger food and the wine. And as it developed, the general learned that who they were, that who her father was, and he said, "Oh, well, I'm General Civarelli, James Civarelli, and I'm not going to give his title on the air here." So he was extremely high-ranking Army general, and at the time, and he invited them the next day to visit him at his office in the Pentagon. And they looked at each other, and they said, they were telling me this story in whispers, and they looked at each other and they said, "Oh, gee, we're flying back to California." You know, they live up in the Mendocino area, north of San Francisco on the coast of California. They were flying back to California tomorrow. And he said, "Oh, wow, couldn't you change? I really want to show you the Pentagon." And they looked at each other and they decided to change their flight. And so they met him at his office the next morning. And to make a long story short, while they were sitting in his office in the Army area, which, may I remind you, was the most destroyed area in the Pentagon attack, by inside pre-placed explosives, okay, like around April Gallup's desk, and he was luckily not at his desk that morning. He was having coffee or something, because it was about 9:37 in the morning. And so he told them, after taking them around and they went back to his office, he wanted to talk to them about 9/11. He wanted to tell them his experience. And they were kind of like family because of who her father was a mutual friend. And so he confided in them. He said, "You know, there's something about 9/11 that bothers me to this day." And they said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, believe it or not, for 4 or 5 days leading up to 9/11, and on 9/11, the Pentagon was doing these counterterrorism emergency response exercises on how we would respond in case the building was threatened by a plane." So that's really important information. Why is it important information? And I now have this from General Civarelli. And the reason that I'm thinking about this is because you mentioned this other general. What's important about this is we know for an absolute fact, because it's been acknowledged by the highest levels of the Air Force Officer Corps, that in the 4 days leading up to 9/11 and on 9/11, and pre-scheduled for the day after 9/11, the 12th, from the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, 9/11, there were a series of 5 emergency response exercises in New York City on slightly varying scenarios of the World Trade Center being attacked by hijacked commercial airlines. So in both New York City and at the Pentagon, leading up 4 days, leading up to the 4th day being 9/11, and pre-scheduled for the day after even, which of course didn't happen because 9/11 happened, that what happened on 9/11 was a taking live of these so-called emergency response drills, which shows us that it has to be the case that the real perpetrators, the inside perpetrators of these attacks, both in New York City and at the Pentagon, had to have been extremely high up in the military command that wrote and executed these so-called drills.
And if I may add, Barbara, the same thing happened at the London bombings,
7/7,
and also at the bombings in Spain.
Absolutely. The grid.
There was
Yes.
these exercises that were going on at the same exact time, sometimes even in the exact spot.
Yes, and that's true in London on 7/7. The precise three, subway stops and the bus stops. The precise three subway stops that were the three subway stops in this so-called counterterrorism drill were the same three bus stops that were involved in the actual attacks that got piggybacked on the drill that very morning.
Rudy Giuliani was right there as Johnny or Rudy on the spot as a consultant for that exercise in London.
Yes, he was, and so was, guess who? Benjamin Netanyahu.
Oh, wow.
So this is where, in the aspect of my education, where I'm studying politics, and one of my professors did teach some conspiracy theory classes. She's an incredibly bright woman, but this is where it starts really becoming complicated, because as the power structures at the end of the Cold War morphed, and then we had these other conglomerates or cooperation between certain people in intelligence, various and certain other vested private interests. It's hard to tell whether it's a national interest that a national government that's the problem, or is this a cabal of global money that's because we've left the period of history where we can even point to nationalism and say, well, a national government is responsible for their national corporate actors. These are not national corporate actors anymore. These are their own. I think Charles Derber was referring to them as global, emerging global governments, and some of them, tied to things like the WTO and whatnot, and you start to look at what power structures look like, and how the fact that we're viewing the diplomacy and the threats through the lens of strictly national governments and their corporate industries that they're protecting, and that model's not sufficient anymore to contain the cross-pollination of various actors who are maybe acting outside of their government's interest, or maybe are acting partially in it. And then we have private contractors now, and it's almost like the Pandora's box that's been opened after the Cold War, and these other interests taking on their own armed forces and having sway over national governments, and then having their own security forces around the world. It just brings a whole different set of attentions that we need to pay to what's going on around us.
Well, I'm going to give you two data points, two mind-blowing facts that speak to. Michael, are you still on the show?
Yes, thank you. Yep.
Oh, good, great. I believe it was you, Michael, who much earlier in the program, you had an aside comment that you're not sure that we really won World War II. That was a very astute comment. And I'm now going to, I agree with you, and I'm now going to give you two data points that'll blow your mind that speak to that very claim, okay? So the first one is this. I highly recommend that you all race out, everyone listening to this show, including the two of you, race out and buy a book called The People's Advocate. It's by my friend and world-famous attorney Daniel Sheehan.
Oh, yeah.
Danny Sheehan or Daniel Sheehan. And this book, each chapter of the book, he was the attorney for one of the attorneys for the New York Times in the Pentagon Papers case, which, of course, they won. He was the attorney for Karen Silkwood after her death, for her family. He won that. He was the attorney for the Iran-Contra case against North Gordon Hakim, and I could go on and on. So this is a world-famous attorney who wins his cases, okay? So each one of the chapters in this book, called The People's Advocate by Daniel Sheehan, S-H-E-E-H-A-N, attorney Daniel Sheehan, each one of the chapters in the book is a case, one of his world-famous cases, and all the inside of who he knew, how he won the case, who stood up against him, how he won. Okay, so you fast forward in the book, and unfortunately he doesn't have a table of contents that helps you. He doesn't even have chapter titles. So go to the back of the book to the index and look up the name Burkholder Smith. Burkholder Smith. And that will get you to the few pages of this incredible revelation that Daniel Sheehan revealed. So here's the bottom line. Danny Sheehan was the lead attorney for the Christic Institute in the Iran-Contra case. So his office was was on Capitol Hill, close to the Capitol Hill. And one day, into his office, comes a man by the name of Burkholder Smith. I forget his first name. And Mr. Burkholder Smith relates the following. He says, I am Mr. Burkholder Smith. I am, at the time, when he came into Danny Sheehan's office, he said, I am the deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City. Now, as you may recall, Mexico City was critical for the JFK assassination, right? Okay. With Lee Harvey Oswald. So, he says, I am, at this time, I forget the precise year, but it's in the book. He says, I am the deputy CIA station chief in Mexico City. And when George H.W. Bush became CIA director, I received a call from one of his top aides letting me know that they would be very happy if I were able to stay in my position. But for that to happen, I was going to have to be interviewed or vetted by some very important people. They weren't going to tell me who they were. But if I wasn't willing to be vetted and cleared the vet, that I would no longer be able to be in my position, and I probably wouldn't move up to be CIA station chief in Mexico City in the near future. But if I did say yes, that I would be met and I would be picked up the next morning. This is the gist of what it was. Picked up the next morning, I would be blindfolded. And he was. He agreed to do it. He was picked up. He was blindfolded. He was put in a van, an unmarked van, driven to an airport. He was flown someplace, got out, put in another plane, flown for many, many, many hours. Figured that he was going south somehow. Ended up, they took the blindfold off when he was in another unmarked van in Argentina. And he was driven for some while. And then he went over a ridge and was looking down into this perfect German village. And there was an obvious manor house that was the main residence in this village. He was driven up to the front door. He was escorted into the conference room. There was a huge swastika over the mantel of the fireplace. And around the table were real Nazis. I'm talking about some of them going back to Adolf Hitler, elderly men. And they vetted him. And what he had been told is that he would be able to stay in George H.W. Bush's CIA director's CIA if he passed the vet of these people.
Wow.
Now, he realized that if he didn't answer the questions the way they liked, that he probably wouldn't get out there alive. So, of course, he answered yes to their questions. The main thing they wanted from him was, they said, we don't care what you do as long as you promise us, if you stay in your position with the CIA, that you will do nothing to interfere with our drug-running profits. Okay. And so he, of course, said yes. He kept his neck. He got out. As soon as he got back to Washington, D.C., they took the blindfold off. He went straight to Danny Sheehan's office and told the story. Now, we can infer from this story in Danny Sheehan's book, The People's Advocate, we can clearly infer from this story that Mr. Burkholder Smith was not the only top CIA station chief or deputy station chief who had to be flown down to the Hitler Nazis in Argentina to be vetted so that they could then be okay to George H.W. Bush, CIA director, whose father was Hitler's banker in New York.
What was the name of that bank that he was on? Prescott Bush's bank.
Prescott Bush's bank, and I believe it was the Bank of New York.
Yep. And it was. Oh, okay.
Now, I'm just going to fast forward because I know we don't have much time. We have about 5 minutes. I'm going to give you the other data point that goes with this. And remember, this is in response to you, Michael, saying, I'm not sure we, the anti-Nazis won World War II. Okay?
Yes, thank you, because this you're actually speaking directly to the points that that I've been trying to push with just my own speculation, just analyzing history and looking at patterns. But go ahead, please.
So here's the other data point, mind-boggling. So I am a JFK researcher as well, and in fact, this year at Judith Baker was the mistress of Lee Harvey Oswald. She puts on one of the two May JFK assassination conferences in Dallas around the anniversary in November, and I will be speaking there along with Danny Sheehan this year, if you want to go. So last year at the conference, at the other conference, it's called the Lancer JFK conference, because Lancer was JFK's Secret Service code name. At the other Lancer conference, there was a speaker whose presentation I went to. And he has written a book called The Skorzeny Papers. You must get this book. Skorzeny. The Skorzeny Papers. So the Skorzeny Papers are the personal papers of Otto Skorzeny, who was Hitler's top special operations commander throughout World War II. After the end of the war, he was one of the many top Nazis who, quote, turned himself over, unquote, to the Allies. And about 2 years, he became a POW, and then he was taken out of the POW camp by the CIA. And he was moved to a training facility, training the top special operator commandos of all the Allied militaries and special operations forces, including the new Special Operations Forces in the Israeli Defense Force in the new state of Israel. If you can imagine, Hitler's top commando special operations officer trained the top new Mossad and Israeli Defense Forces commandos and special operations forces.
That's mind-blowing.
And the Skorzeny Papers, here's the bottom line of the Skorzeny Papers. A former Air Force officer, now just retired, who is the author, can't remember his name at the moment, it'll come to me. He came upon those papers by an auction, by an amazing synchronicity. And he was the perfect person in the world when he started reading them to realize what he had in his hands. They'd been found in an attic of a friend of Skorzeny's wife. And what these papers showed is that Skorzeny's special operations commandos were activated to kill JFK in Dallas.
Absolutely mind-blowing. And Barbara, this is Michael again. And because you are in, study synchronicity, I'm going to just throw one more name at you. And this was my father's second cousin. His name is Jack Rowley, and he was actually the head of the Secret Service. He had been an FBI agent and was brought to the White House by FDR. He was FDR's personal man. He was at Yalta, an advance man. When FDR went to the White House, he took Jack Rowley as the head of White House security, and then he was promoted later on, I think by Truman, to or maybe it was Eisenhower, to head of the Secret Service, and he was head of the Secret Service through until Nixon. And the only thing he told my father tells me is that he told him not to go to so Rowley, after he retired, he knew so much. Back then there were no cell phones. He spent the rest of his life in fair isolation after Kennedy's assassination. After the man retired, he only saw him at a couple of weddings, and he had to check in 3 times a day with the Secret Service. But there was a guy that knew he was a fly on the wall for history. And I'd love to know what he had to say about any of this stuff.
So I take it he was not in Dallas that day.
Jack Rowley? No.
Yeah.
I have to close the show now for the next producer coming on. But Barbara, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'd love to do another show with you.
Sure.
And we have a lot to talk about here.
I'll send you April Gallup's transcript, and also send you links that we've talked about here to follow up.
Thank you so much, and have a good night, and thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Look forward to the audio link to this show as soon as you can.
I'll get it right to you. Good night now.
All right.
And thank you, Michael. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for hosting, and I'd like to really thank the people here at this station for actually standing up for truth.
Amen.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
And so everybody have a good night.